members, the Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? The member for Griffith.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Billionaires have too much power over politics, and it's clear they would love nothing more than to export the same destructive US-style politics and Trumpism into Australia. It was on full display at Trump's inauguration, front row seats for Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, now the richest people in the world. If any of these guys lost 99% of their wealth overnight, they'd still wake up billionaires tomorrow. Even if you saved $1,000 a day and you started from the earliest record of first humans that was 315,000 years ago, you still wouldn't have as much money as any of them right now. And if that sounds incomprehensible, it's because it's exactly that, incomprehensible. There are 159 billionaires in Australia, the most there's ever been. And according to Oxfam, just a single average one is earning $67,000 every single hour. Just one, $67,000. That's the median salary, meaning that these billionaires are earning every hour what half the workers across this country earn over an entire year. Many of these workers can barely afford their rent, mortgage, their groceries, or even afford to go to the dentist. Is this the sort of country we want to live in? One where billionaires like Clive Palmer can take home 1,300 times the typical wage, where over 3 million people live in poverty? If your answer is of course not, then the next question is, how could this happen? Well, you just got to follow the money. Billionaires donated over $2 million to the major parties last financial year alone. That's a pretty good deal for access and influence. In fact, the opposition leader flew across the country to party with Australia's richest billionaire, Gina Rinehart, who's donated millions to the Liberal Party through the Cormack Foundation. And the Liberals' track record shows exactly who they're working for: cutting penalty rates, attacking workers' rights, slashing funding for public services like hospitals and public schools, all while dishing out tax breaks for big corporations and their billionaire mates. And there's no one they won't scapegoat to do it. Refugees, migrants, First Nations people, the queer community, people on income support. This is the opposition leader's playbook: stoke fear and division while his billionaire mates get richer. But we will not let him win. And if you're worried about the future, the antidote is fighting for a bold, positive plan to tackle the cost of living and housing crisis. And the Greens have one. Right now, 1 in 3 big corporations pay no tax. But if we make those corporations and billionaires pay their fair share, we can fund the services everyone needs. Getting dental and mental health into Medicare, ensuring you can see a GP for free, wiping all student debt, 50-cent public transport fares, making price gouging illegal by the big supermarkets, stopping the tax handouts to wealthy property investors, capping rent increases, all while powering this country with renewables, not new coal and gas. This election, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The last time the Greens were in minority government, we got dental into Medicare for kids and world-leading climate legislation. This time we can stop Dutton and push Labor to act.
The member for Solomon.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. On Christmas morning in Darwin, in fact across Australia, everyone came together as a community to remember, to commemorate in small ways and big, the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy. I want to thank the Prime Minister, the Governor-General and the Chief of the Defence Force, himself also a survivor of Cyclone Tracy, for joining us in Darwin. The stories of survivors left a long-lasting mark on everyone, but as the Prime Minister has said, even only last week, it was one of the best things he has done in his life to be there at that anniversary, and it was a very moving experience. It was, of course, a real shame, a significant shame that no one from the federal coalition could put politics aside and turn up for the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, but there you go. I want to take this opportunity to recognise a significant Australian in his leadership in the aftermath of Cyclone Tracy, in Major General Alan Stretton. While his decision-making and assertiveness during the crisis were not universally admired by Territorians or those in Darwin at that time, I think it is true that he was a leader who took charge and made swift decisions that ultimately benefited everyone and provided the people of Darwin the direction that they needed during that devastating crisis. And his great nephew, who's a mate of mine, reflected this in some social media recently, and I agree with Max, who's a fine Australian as well. Next week we'll commemorate another terrible national event in Darwin's history, but one that we're proud of when we defended Darwin. The bombing of Darwin on the 19th of February 1942 was the largest single attack ever mounted by a foreign power on Australia, and when it hit our home of Darwin. We will continue to be nationally significant into the future. Our place at the fulcrum of the Indo-Pacific Oceans, and that is being even more recognised by our allies and partners, with the Japanese, of course, announcing at the end of last year that their ground self-defence forces will rotate for training through Darwin, as the US Marines do as well. Their amphibious rapid deployment brigade will train with our 1st Brigade and others in the north. Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to represent the people of Darwin and Palmerston and all Territorians, and I look forward to being in Central Australia again soon with my friend Marion Scrimgeour, the member for Lengyari, who's doing a fantastic job representing Territorians as well. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The member for Moore.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The upcoming state and federal elections are an opportunity to deliver major infrastructure for residents of Perth's northern suburbs. I acknowledge the bipartisan efforts of my state counterparts in the member for Kingsley, Jessica Stokowski, MLA, member for Hillary's, Caitlin Collins, MLA, and member for Joondalup, Emily Hamilton, MLA, in working cooperatively with all 3 levels of government to successfully secure unprecedented record levels of funding to develop our northern suburbs community. I welcome the commitment of $225 million by the WA state government for the grade separation of the Reid Highway with traffic bridges at the busy intersections with Erindale Road and Balcatta Road. It is an important infrastructure project which will connect the residential suburbs of Moore with the economic development areas of Balcatta, Malaga and beyond, including Perth Airport, which will make the commute much easier for the thousands of FIFO workers living in my electorate. It is a major road upgrade for which I have been campaigning for many years. I am pleased that the state government has expanded the scope of the project design to include multiple intersections at Erindale and Balcatta Roads in the upgrade. However, this congestion-busting project is dependent on the Commonwealth Government matching the state contribution on a 50-50 basis by providing $225 million in federal funding. I call upon the Federal Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development to make a funding commitment in the lead-up to the upcoming election, as this project will benefit many communities in the 3 adjoining federal electorates, namely Cowan, Moore and Pearce. I also welcome the commitment of $16 million by the WA State Government towards the $26 million redevelopment of Warwick Stadium to expand the basketball facilities and bring the Perth Wildcats to our northern suburbs. The proposed redevelopment includes 3 new basketball courts, new physiotherapy facilities, a new gym, a wellness centre, upgraded change rooms, amenities and community spaces. This project is dependent on securing a further $10 million in funding from the federal government, local government and private sources. I look forward to working cooperatively with the stakeholders to source the remainder of the funding necessary to make these projects a reality. The Prime Minister has declared Moore to be a key seat in the upcoming election, so federally funding these projects is a high priority. Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Bruce.
Last week, the opposition leader, in his shambles of a show, I say shambles because I can't say the other S word with show here, reached a new level, a new low of disrespect to the people I represent in South East Melbourne, but indeed to every Australian, Deputy Speaker. He announced his official policy that he literally will not tell the Australian people before the election what he's going to cut. His official policy now is literally, they're his words, he's not going to tell you, $315 billion of secret cuts, but he's asking people to vote for him, but he won't tell them what he's going to cut. Literally massive secret cuts. You know what he's for? Secret cuts. He doesn't have, as the media said this morning rightly, Nikki Saba's column, he doesn't have a single costed, credible policy to put forward. So there's nothing really he's for except secret cuts. But there are some clues on what he wants to cut. You've got to follow the breadcrumb trail. He said that free TAFE is wasteful spending. He's opposed cheaper childcare, doesn't like those cheaper medicines that are helping with cost of living, called for an election on Labor's tax cuts. He's been against the tax cuts, but who knows what he's for? You can also look at his record. If you're following the trail, he's against Medicare and the universal health system. When he was the health minister, in that horror show period under Tony Abbott, $50 billion cut from public hospitals. That's his record. They're facts, they're numbers. He tried to introduce a GP tax to literally destroy bulk billing, to charge every Australian to go to the doctor, because according to the Liberal Party, if you don't pay for it, you don't value it. And he even floated introducing a charge to go to the emergency department at public hospitals. That's actually his record. And when we say this, when we remind Australians of what he's actually like, what he actually is, the Liberals say, oh, you're running a scare campaign. Well, I tell you what's scary. It's the idea of the leader of the opposition in charge of anything and being able to implement his $315 billion horror show of cuts to public services. Never before in the history of our Westminster democracy, in 120 years, have we had an opposition leader, the pretend alternative Prime Minister, who is so arrogant, so divisive, so reckless that he's saying to Australians, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. Well, he should get the response that he deserves from people for that kind of arrogance. He's like a cheap complaints line, wanders around the country like a sort of a Harry Potter-style Dementor, spreading negative energy and fear and hate and division with not a single costed, credible policy. But the $315 billion of cuts are just the start, because he needs to cut a lot more than that to fund $600 billion of risky nuclear reactors that'll push up your power bills by $1,200. And goodness knows how much he needs to cut for the $10 billion bosses' long lunches giant tax loophole. Peter Dutton is worse than Scott Morrison, and that's a big call.
Thank you. The member for Canning.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We're at a crossroads over in Western Australia, and after nearly 8 years of Labor, what do we have to show for it? A health system in crisis, rising crime, and a cost of living crisis making life harder for Australians. And that's why I'm proud to support 5 outstanding local Liberal candidates for the State Parliament on the 8th of March, who will fight for their communities and bring good governance back to Western Australia. Owen Mulder, the Liberal for Dawesville, a neighbour of mine in Halls Head, and Owen knows what matters most, fixing Peel Health Campus and improving community safety. Labor promised hospital upgrades and more police, but they haven't delivered. Instead, they wasted time and money on the disastrous Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act and multi-billion-dollar blowouts on Perth train lines. Owen will fight for the Peel Health Campus and a stronger police presence in our community, as well as a new high school in Dawesville. Your vote matters in Dawesville, is what I'll say to my constituents, and Owen Mulder is the local champion we need to deliver for us. Kay Sieber, the Liberal for Mandurah. Kay is a respected community leader with a heart for service, running Mum's Cottage to support local families in need. Kay understands the real challenges people face and will be a strong voice for Mandurah, fighting to fix our hospital, restore proper policing and ensure services keep up with our growing city. Mark Jones, the Liberal for Secret Harbour. Secret Harbour is growing, but Labor isn't keeping up. It needs real infrastructure, widening the Kwinana Freeway and finally delivering the long-awaited Carnup train station. Labor has been talking about the station for years, but keep kicking the can down the road. It's time for them to get it done. And Mark knows that we need better healthcare and more police. He's running because he's sick of watching his community get ignored while billions are wasted elsewhere. Paul Mansfield, the Liberal for Darling Range. As a father and a specialist teacher, Paul understands the pressures families face. He's focused on real improvements, unlocking affordable housing in Mundajong, upgrading local sports facilities and delivering better support for volunteer emergency services, particularly our volunteer firefighters. I know Paul will be a tireless advocate for Darling Range. And finally, David Bolt, the Liberal for Murray Wellington. Murray Wellington is growing fast, but Labor has failed to plan for that growth. Towns like Pinjarra, Dwellingup and Waroona have been left behind. David will fight to upgrade the Pill Health campus and push for a new public hospital to serve the 450,000 people moving into our region. David's committed to major road upgrades, including the Pinjarra heavy haulage deviation and opening up new housing opportunities. This election is our chance to send a message to Roger Cook and WA Labor. They've taken our vote for granted for far too long. WA Liberals Owen Mulder, Kay Sieber, Mark Jones, Paul Mansfield and David Bolt are ready to serve, and I ask that you support them.
Thank you. The member for Chifley.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I think a lot of us know no one ever leads a perfect life. Everyone has challenges from time to time. Some people have them more than others. And it's not always the case that there'll be people there necessarily in your immediate circle of family and friends that can help. The great thing about my community is I get to see in Chifley a lot of people step up to help those who in a time of need just need a bit of guidance. Two of those people, Deputy Speaker, in my area are Sally and Martin Wynd. They, back in the late 90s, with only $50, started a mob called Eagles Raps in Doonside. And this has helped target people, particularly young people, that just need someone to talk to, just need a hand, need someone to be able to learn new skills from. Sometimes they've had trouble in school and had problems in being able to get along, but they receive that support and through Eagles Raps in particular, learn new skills that they can put to work to get a job, to open up new opportunity, to get a better life. In December, I got to see the graduation of a number of students from Eagles Raps in the work that they've done with Amazon Web Services to learn digital skills that are in high demand. It's a great partnership between Eagles Raps and Amazon to do that. The reason I mention this, Deputy Speaker, is because it was terrific to see Sally and Martin recognised in the Order of Australia, being recognised through the awarding of Order of Australia medals, recognising, reflecting their community service. It is a just and fitting tribute to a pair that have done tremendous work in our area, and the biggest thing I just want to say to him is thank you for believing in young people of Doonside and Western suburbs and making sure that they have the opportunity to pursue their dreams. On the Australia Day ceremonies that occurred in our area, particularly in Blacktown Council's area, there are a number of people that have been recognised, but in particular in the awards that were celebrated, we had the Mount Druitt Family Science Day take out the prize for Community Event of the Year, which I saw firsthand, organised by Mecca. Fantastic way to encourage science participation. Paul Wynn from Prospect, who helped create Grace's Place in Doonside, the first of its kind centre that helps kids who've lost family members. He's a Citizen of the Year. And the young citizen Marion Coles, who started Pay It Forward Angels. It's grown into a network of 1,400 volunteers, and over Christmas they gave out more than 400 gifts to people doing it tough, the type of community spirit we love. Thank you to all those people, all those folks who do tremendous work in our area to build better and stronger neighbourhoods.
Thank you. The member for Groom.
Thank you, Speaker. I fully support the Queensland Government's adult crime, adult time laws. It's early days yet and there's much work to do. But like most Queenslanders, I know that this is the right approach and this is what our state needs. For far too long in our state, the balance between early intervention and appropriate detention has weighed in favour of the offenders and not the victims. And sadly, this lopsided approach has hurt Queenslanders. It's particularly hurt my hometown of Toowoomba, where we saw an escalating youth crime crisis cause so much havoc in our city. I 100% support the Premier's policy. But Speaker, crime is not an issue that I'll be walking away from because I genuinely believe that all levels of government have a role to play. Local councils often focus on lighting, CCTV cameras and local advocacy. In our region, the Toowoomba Regional Council's leadership on the Safer Toowoomba Region Partnership is a great example of this. State governments, of course, have the prominent role with the police and the magistrates, but the federal government has a strong role to play too. Initiatives like the Centre to Counter Child Exploitation and the Safer Communities Funding Program are two examples that the Coalition made whilst last in government. We also, Speaker, have a very important role to play in addressing drug trafficking and importation. Most illegal drugs moving around Australia are brought across our borders, and most of the offenders caught in Queensland's youth crime crisis were involved in drugs in some way. Criminologists, Queensland's Youth Justice Department, the Queensland Police Service and the Queensland Family and Child Commission all identified drug use and dependence as a significant motivator that drove young people to offend and re-offend. Their message is clear: take the drugs off the streets and you will see a reduction in youth crime. Given the clear link between illicit drugs and youth crime, Australia expects their federal government to be doing everything they can to keep those drugs out of our country and out of the hands of our children. Sadly, this hasn't been the case. Australian Border Force has confirmed there's been a decrease in both air and sea patrols since Labor came to power. Aerial flying hours have decreased by 20.7%, maritime patrol days decreased by 12.2%. This is the very front line of Australia's efforts to keep illicit drugs out of our country that's been weakened and will be made weaker with further cuts of $600 million coming to Australia's border security over the forward estimates. So, Speaker, when we say Labor are soft on crime, this is exactly what we're talking about. These efforts that could be made to keep these drugs out of our country are being weakened, are being relaxed. Drugs from overseas are driving youth crime in towns and cities like Toowoomba, and Labor is reducing our ability to keep these drugs out. Queensland needs a federal government that is willing to do everything it can to support our state's effort to end the youth crime crisis. Speaker, I certainly don't want to see more kids in detention. No one does. I want to see less kids committing the sort of heinous crimes that have plagued our state. And to end, I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, our police force who've done such a magnificent job during this youth crime crisis to keep Queenslanders safe.
Call the member for Eden-Monaro.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I recently had the great privilege of attending a last post ceremony at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra to honour Private Dudley Lucas and his brother Private Basil Albert Lucas. The Lucas brothers were from Brogo in the Bega Valley and in 1941 answered the call and enlisted in the army. Incredibly, 9 of the 10 Lucas brothers served in the Second World War, often enlisting multiple times until they were accepted for service. Basil and Dudley gave their lives in service, with Dudley's body sadly never found. Basil died on the 25th of November 1942, aged just 18, and Dudley was presumed dead on the 15th of January 1942. I first heard about this story of the brothers when I was Mayor of the Bega Valley, when in 2017 I was fortunate enough to work with the Lucas family to have a plaque installed outside the Bega Commemorative Civic Centre. This one family gave so much, and it's important and right that we acknowledge them and honour them. We are eternally grateful for the contribution this family has made, and I thank the Lucas family for letting me join you at the commemoration. A huge day and a huge congratulations to everyone on Australia Day who received awards across the Eden-Monaro. I was fortunate enough to attend citizenship ceremonies and Australia Day services in Goulburn, Captain's Flight and Queanbeyan, welcome new citizens to the community and to celebrate local award winners. Congratulations to all the Australia Day award winners and nominees. Thank you so much for your commitment and service to our communities. There are a lot of local recipients, so I'm going to table all these names for Hansard for all of our major towns, which are incredibly important. And I also want to acknowledge and take the time to congratulate those who have been awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia, as well as public service medals, the Australian Fire Service Medal, and a range of Defence Service medals. And again, I'm going to table all of those names. A quick shout out though to local champion Nikki Ayres, who was the first Paralympic gold medalist from Dalmini, who received an OAM for her service to the sport. And well done to Robin Reynolds, who received the Australian Fire Service Medal, who has contributed so much to the Pambula Rural Fire Service. I want to give a shout out to a very special person in our community turning 100 on April 1 this year. Pasha Yashushin is, with her husband, contributed enormously to the Queanbeyan community. She should be acknowledged for her upcoming milestone, considering the hardship she's encountered earlier in her life. Pasha and her husband were taken from Ukraine in their late teens and used as forced labour during World War II in Germany. However, post-war, they were given the opportunity for a better life, and hence they came to Australia in 1949 seeking a better future. Whilst they came with nothing, they both worked extremely hard and managed to build their forever home in Queanbeyan. Pasha forged a career in catering, worked at the Queanbeyan Hospital and then at the National Library, while her husband was a carpenter and worked here on the construction of this building. Congratulations to Pasha and her family at this special time. It's a privilege to share this story.
Has expired, and I call the member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise today to congratulate my community of Mitchell on a wonderful Australia Day celebration of our contemporary Australian nation and also our shared history. I had the opportunity to attend events in both my electorate throughout the Hills District, but also in Greater Western Sydney. In Parramatta, of course, I always speak of the great harmony between Parramatta, an ancient Aboriginal meeting place, a seat of colonial government power for the whole of Australia, and a modern, thriving, multicultural city. And the ceremony in particular at Parramatta is a seamless example, I think, to all of us here in the Federal Parliament of unity around our shared history and our shared journey together between those three very important themes of modern Australia. I also want to take a moment to congratulate the Australia Day Honours Awards recipients in my electorate. Loretta Krause, AM, was recognised for her significant service to education and national international basketball. A teacher from 1988, held senior roles in principals, Director of Educational Leadership, many roles within the Department of Education, but also seen her work internationally at the basketball level in the Hall of Fame, inducted in and became the lead statistics reviewer for men and women's basketball World Cups. Bill Henderson, OAM, was honoured for his outstanding service to football. He was a member of the Socceroos from 1954 to 56, including the Olympic Games in Melbourne. This is something that Bill's family have great pride in, and obviously reflected in Bill's induction into the Football Hall of Fame in 1999. The late Ronald Lord, OAM, who was another Socceroo from 1951 to 54, goalkeeper for Australia at the Melbourne Olympics in 1956. Obviously a posthumous award. His family are very proud of Ronald and his service for Australia at this level. Rob Katz, a very special member of the Hills community, and his wife together. He is a passion for judo, has trained so many young people in judo in our community and continues to serve in that role. He's competed internationally and led Olympic teams for Australia to Seoul, Athens, Paris and Hong Kong. He's a two-time silver and four-time bronze medalist at the Australian Championships. He's devoted his life to this sport, but he's an integral part of the Mitchell community and well respected and regarded and loved. Chief Inspector Jenkins, APM, awarded with the Australian Police Medal for exceptional service. He's an exceptional police officer and continues to ensure the wellbeing of officers in the Hills District Command and elsewhere in the state. And Sharon Smith, the Public Service Medal for her outstanding service to New South Wales Health, especially during the COVID pandemic, and with 36 years of industry experience as the Chief Data Officer in Systems, Information and Analytics at New South Wales Health. We can't underestimate Sharon's contribution in what is the biggest health crisis of our time, interpreting health data, and in an era of data-driven solutions. I just want to thank Sharon Smith, PSM, for her great service to health in Australia. And I do want to take a moment to commend all Australia Day Award recipients in my electorate and indeed around the country for their immense service and their ongoing commitment to our nation's cohesion.
Call the member for Cooper.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to inform this chamber of an important step that will save lives and help Australians make informed choices about their healthcare. Deputy Speaker, it was community advocates, parents and patients here in Australia and my electorate of Cooper, and indeed around the world, that raised awareness of the neuropsychiatric side effects of taking Montelukast, a prescription asthma and allergy medication. These advocates experienced trauma and confusion and, sadly, even death of their children. The TGA last month issued a safety alert to better highlight these side effects, including a new warning at the start of the product information and consumer medication information sheets on Montelukast products, and additional information for doctors and patients on what to do if serious behaviour and mood-related changes happen. I thank everyone who has raised this issue with me and fought so hard. This will help doctors and families across the country be better informed. It won't bring back young people we've lost, but it will help save future lives. So thank you. I also wanted to express my pride about the Albanese Labor government's commitment to women's health. As Assistant Health Minister, I often meet with women to hear their stories and to inform our policy. I heard one such story only last week from Carmen Lahef-Jenkins, a social justice advocate in my community of Reservoir. At the age of just 13, Carmen suffered from undiagnosed adenomyosis and diverticulitis and was told by a doctor that women just have pain. Throughout her life, her pain was constantly dismissed. At times, Carmen lost her vision or the use of her hands and arms, and over the course of 2 years, she constantly asked the doctor if this could be MS. So what did her doctor do? He ordered a blood test for MS just to placate Carmen, but Carmen later discovered that there's no such thing as a blood test for MS. He was merely mollifying her. Carmen went to another doctor who ordered proper tests, and what showed up was deeply troubling. With concerning neurological symptoms and bilateral changes in her brain, it appeared that Carmen may have had up to 11 strokes. Carmen was later diagnosed with antiphospholipid syndrome, or APLS. This is shocking, I know, but working with Carmen, I'm pleased to bring attention to APLS today, because I share Carmen's grave concern for the underdiagnosis of stroke and other autoimmune diseases such as APLS in women. The vast majority of people who suffer with autoimmune diseases are in fact women. No woman and no person should go through what Carmen went through. This government has made a lot of progress addressing medical misogyny, but as I stand in this place and reflect Carmen's story, I am reminded of just how much more there is to do. Thank you.
In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded, and I call the clerk.
Government business, orders of the day, number 1, Competition and Consumer Amendment, Australian Energy Regulator Separation Bill 2024, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for New England.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and what I have to explain to people today is how, if you have an issue with the cost of living, then you have to understand how energy prices work. This is a remarkable swindle, a scam that is played on the Australian people, and let's go through it just briefly. The first part of the scam, obviously, is you have a capacity investment scheme where, in secret agreements, the government underwrites the return on the construction of intermittent power precincts. They're not renewable. Intermittent power precincts, your solar panels, your wind turbines that are littered all over the country. I noted one from Vestas the other day fell flat in its face, but let's not worry about that. So actually, even if they don't provide power, you pay. The taxpayer pays. It underwrites a return on them. Not bad. I wish I could get a return on a property that I bought, even if I didn't produce cattle, even if I didn't produce grain. The taxpayer just forked out and paid me for it. Then we have the next thing. They provide a product that apparently you have to buy. Like, using the cattle analogy, if you had to buy my cattle, you had to buy my belted Galloways or, I don't know, speckled Parks. Whether you wanted them or not, you had to buy them. That was what was demanded. But I think one of the best things that you have to understand is how the pricing stack works. In a pricing stack, they don't bid, even though your fridge works for 24 hours, even though you'd expect your lights to be on for 24 hours, you only have to bid to provide electricity for 5 minutes. See, and people can pick that. See, I think the breeze is blowing, sun's out, 5 minutes, I can do that. So they bid into the stack. The stack is like this pencil. So the intermittents, when the sun's shining, they bid in. Might even be negative. And they say, well, we're the cheapest. But they're only providing for 5 minutes. And then others bid into the stack. And, you know, after wind, then you'll have coal, they'll come in. Then you'll have, I suppose, gas, even diesel electricity. So even though these people might be negative, they don't get paid negative. They actually get paid the highest price that is determined by AEMO. So if AEMO says we need that much of the stack, that much of the pencil, then the price right there is what all these people get paid. Isn't that marvellous? Once more, like going to the sale yards and I get paid for my potty calves the same price as someone with fat steers. That's a great deal. It's almost like it was set up by someone to make a bucket load of money. So, though these people are negative, let's have a look at what that price has got to. Now, I've gone to this site. This is the official site. This is AEMO, and it's got the spot price per megawatt hour here. Forecast spot price, $57. $57 a megawatt hour. That's not bad. Pretty reasonable. So you'd think you'd be getting it at $57. But listen to this. This was the price where it went to on the 5th of February. Have a guess. Just have a guess. Just have a punt, $57. Have a punt of what you think it might have gone to. Maybe you believe it might have gone to 70 or 80. Or maybe you go right out there and think it went to 100. Oh no. It went to about $17,000. $17,000 for something that has a spot price of $57. Now, you're worried about your cost of living. You're worried about why you're poor. You're worried about why you can't pay for your power bill. Well, you're just bundling this money up and it's heading overseas to multinational corporations, Chinese corporations, to Dutch corporations, to French corporations. It's bundling it up. This is great. This is a rolled gold annuity. Got the taxpayers on the hook at the start, the capacity investment scheme, and the poor old pensioner, she's on the hook at the end, pays for it through their PowerPoint. And see, she can't live with power for just 5 minutes. She has to live with power for 24 hours. Now, if you made the stack where they had to provide for 24 hours, all the intermittents would disappear. But so it's a trick. How do you keep these people on the hook? I'm a little old accountant, used to be a cost accountant. For the cost accountant, my job was to try and make sure we made money. You keep them on the hook by guilt. See, the first thing is you change. Rather than call it intermittent power, which is what it is, it intermittently works. You call it renewables. It's one it doesn't called angel power. Angel power would work even better if you called it angel power. And then you call these lines of wind towers that just litter the landscape and then are connected by transmission lines that, when you really listen to this, when they're finished their life, guess who's responsible for pulling them down? The farmer. And guess what? Andrew Dyer, who was the Ombudsman, who was appointed by the Labor Party, guess what he said in his report of how much it costs to decommission one? Between $400,000 to $600,000, up to $1 million if there's a structural imperfection. And Best is one that fell over the other day. It certainly had a structural imperfection. Now, what farmer is going to have $1 million a tower in 8 to 10 years' time to pull these down? None. So what you're going to have is negative value on land. The land will have no value. The impairment, the contingent liability that will rest on that land will be worth more than the land. So these things are just going to fall over. Now, this is creating a bit of a problem, but imagine if they had to provide power for 24 hours like your fridge works for 24 hours. If you had to bid for 24-hour slots, well, then it's only baseload people who'd be able to do it. Your coal-fired power stations, your nuclear, your hydro, because they actually can provide power all the way through. And we have to come to grips with this, because if we don't sort this out, you are not going to have a manufacturing. Don't worry about made in Australia. There'll be nothing to be made in Australia because your cost will be through the roof. If there was any prospect that we were going to have globally cheap power prices, then very smart people at Mitsubishi, at Hyundai, at Skoda, at Boeing, at Rolls-Royce, at Microsoft, they'd be all moving here to take advantage of what they believe will be the cheapest power in the world. But of course, none of them are moving here because they understand our power market better than us. The next part of this great swindle, of course, was green hydrogen. Remember when everybody, this was going to work so well, the whole world's going to be run on green hydrogen, it's great. It's all falling over. It's all falling over. Now, they talk about, how much is the cost of the lunch policy, that you could get tax deductibility for lunch. I think we want to know what has been the cost of these policies. How many billions of dollars are now borrowed for these policies? Why don't we know that? Why is the capacity investment scheme secret? Surely, you just take the names out, surely we should be able to know what sort of return these companies overseas are getting. We've got Chinese real estate companies in there. In our area, we had a Nigerian billionaire, and good luck to him. He had very smart accountants. A Nigerian billionaire was terribly worried about the environment in Australia. They were terribly worried. So he was in there bidding on this. Obviously, he has some very good cost accountants who'd say, mate, this is incredible. We have the Australians, they're wonderful people, beautiful people, but kind of crazy. They're going to pay you a return even if nothing is produced. And then you have to buy their product. And then they're able to sell it in 5-minute blocks. Where it'll be really good is where the batteries come in, because batteries probably will be able to provide for 5 minutes. And so they'll jump into the stack at the low end, knowing they're going to get paid the price at the high end. So, we can muse about the cost of living. We can say the wonderful things that we're all going to do about it. But until we properly address, in fact, I would say for most people actually understand how power pricing works, we're not going to fix very much at all, because it's just not possible when on the AEMO side itself says it's going to $16,000+ a megawatt hour, that you can possibly put that back to the PowerPoint of the pensioner and somehow make their life better. You're going to make their life worse. In our area, why am I so affirmed about this? Why I'm so I suppose, worked up about this? Because in regional areas, we live with the poorest people. In my area, one of my local schools, one of the poorest in New South Wales, probably one of the poorest in Australia. No police in the town, no hospital in the town, no sewerage, no public sewerage, no facilities really at all. See, people roll down the hill in life. They keep rolling down and down and down and down. And where they finally end up, when they're right out of luck, is little villages in the hills with no services whatsoever. But the one dignity that we should be able to provide them is electricity. It gets cold, especially Walbrook. Walbrook gets pretty cold. Once it got down to minus 17 degrees. Minus 10 happens quite a few times a year. It's got down to minus 7. That means if you leave your window open and you maybe intoxicate, you're dead. There's quite a simple outcome. So they've got to have power. And we do have people in our areas where they can no longer afford the rent because the money's chewed up because they use the power. See, poor people have bad electrical appliances. They use the appliances that use the most power, the worst heaters and the worst fridges, just like the cars are the most inefficient cars because they don't have money. But when you can't afford the rent because the power price is through the roof and you can't afford the fuel, you go out to live in your car. That becomes your house. You live in the car. And this really happens. This really happens. And when you meet these people, you get angry. Angry. Because you think, what am I doing? Why is this person living like this in Australia? And they're not on drugs. They're not alcoholics. They're decent people. So when we're being assuaged in this sort of moral turmoil of climate policy, and we're going to do marvellous things, and it's all so important, premise that feeling on exactly where you're coming from. Do you have a house? Do you have a wage? Are you comfortable? Do you have to live with the privations of going without? Because if you are living in that, just in a little corner of your mind, start balancing up in your moral scales what is important. The dignity of this human being or my feelings, because that's what it is. There's nothing that's going to happen in this nation that I'm not going to even enter the debate of what's happening to the climate because it's not relevant to this. What is relevant is what's happening to that person. That is very relevant. That is so relevant. And what I feel we've lost sight of is we're trying to help billionaires. We're trying to help multinational corporations. That they have created this marvellous, marvellous scam. And we're trotting along with it. Sooner or later, the epiphany is going to happen. Because power prices, if they don't come down, if people remain poor, then like snap overnight, the political dynamic will change. When enough of these people are living in their cars, when people have had enough of their power prices, when they realise that power prices go into the price of food, go into the price of everything, can you name me one thing you do in your life that you buy that doesn't have electricity somewhere involved with it? Well, once people realise that, they realise unless you fix the power problem, unless you are a realist, unless you are honest and decide who is most in need, you have Buckleys and none of fixing the cost of living crisis.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I thank honourable members for their contributions to the debate. On the Competition and Consumer Amendment, Australian Energy Regulator Separation Bill 2024, the bill seeks to establish a legally separate Australian Energy Regulator, the AER, as distinct from the ACCC to provide greater management and financial autonomy for our energy regulator, enhancing its ability to manage resources and set its strategic direction. This will allow the AER to respond with agility to changing energy consumer needs and to focus with greater clarity on energy security, reliability and affordability for energy consumers. It's a reform that was supported by 3 separate ministerial council processes or inquiries during the time of the previous 3-term, 9-year coalition government. It's an utterly sensible reform, Deputy Speaker, that the previous government didn't manage to deliver. And as I say, what it will do is mean that the AER can do an even better job when it comes to delivering energy security, reliability and affordability for energy consumers. And I'll just pick up on the contribution to the debate from the member for New England. It is hard, as much as the member was taking the opportunity to range widely on a whole series of aspects of, I don't really know what, to be honest, energy perhaps to some degree and the economy more broadly and various other things. It is hard to hear someone talk about the dignity of human beings when they were a member of the government that inflicted robo-debt on the poorest and most vulnerable Australians, when they were part of a government that led the share of income for ordinary working Australians to fall to its lowest level in Australian history, and where they now propose to inflict the most expensive form of energy on all Australians, paid entirely by taxpayers in a way that will put serious imposts on precisely the people that the member for New England claims to represent. It is a bit hard to hear that lecture. But the reform we're making with this bill, which was recommended, as I said, by 3 separate ministerial council processes to the previous government, this reform will enhance Australia's energy market governance arrangements, allowing the AER to be responsible for its own resources and administrative arrangements, contributing to a strong and independent energy regulator that will ensure energy consumers across Australia are better off for many years to come. It will literally make sure that Australian energy consumers have cheaper, more reliable and more affordable energy, and on that basis I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I will put that question. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Against, no. No. I think the ayes have it. No. Division required. Division required. As it is necessary to resolve this question to enable further questions to be considered in relation to this bill, in accordance with Standing Order 195, the bill will be returned to the House for further consideration, and I call the clerk.
Government Business, Order of the Day number 2, Treasury Laws Amendment, Tax Incentives and Integrity Bill 2024, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The original question was that this bill be now read a second time. To this, the Honourable Member for Petrie has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Riverina.
And I support the member for Petrie's well-considered amendment. The Treasury Laws Amendment, Tax Incentives and Integrity Bill of 2024 is a 4-schedule omnibus bill. It contains disparate tax administration and incentives measures. It goes to the core of small business. And small business, as we've heard so often, is the heart of the Australian economy. Now, a former small business minister in the coalition government was Bruce Bilson. Bruce Bilson now heads up the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise. He is the Ombudsman for AUSParliamentLive. And that website holds some very, very good information, and anybody contemplating starting a small business, anybody running a small business, ought to go onto the AUSParliamentLive website and see what that portal has to offer them to help them wade through the mire of legislation, industrial relations, and just some helpful tips. And I admire Mr Bilson for his passionate enthusiasm about small business. Never was a better small business minister than he. And I say that as a former. I did have that portfolio. I did indeed. But the former minister, the now AUSParliamentLive Ombudsman, was the next level. Interestingly, of those small businesses which fail, I think the figure is somewhere in the order of 82% fail because of cash flow problems. Not enough cash coming through the door, not being able to retain customers. There are any myriad of reasons as to why small businesses fail. There are record numbers of small businesses failing now because of the policies of the Albanese Labor government. And it's tough enough to run a small business. I know, I've run one. I hear the Greens member saying, me too. And I know she's an architect. I know she's run a small business. I say congratulations to her, because we need people in this place who understand small business more than ever before. And look, I don't agree with the Greens on just about anything. Somebody could say anything. But if they've run a small business, well, good on you. I appreciate that you have. But with small business, we need to look at some of the figures, and I'll get back to the other failure rate, which is extraordinary at the moment. But you look at the employment. Small business, 42%, medium-sized, 24%, large, 34%. But the number of businesses as a percentage of overall businesses, small, 97.2%. So 97.2% of businesses in Australia are small. Medium, 2.6%, large, 0.2%. And these figures are from the AUSParliamentLive website, so they would certainly be accurate. But what you also need to remember is that $500 billion worth of economic activity is being generated by small business. They employ 5.2 million Australians. 5.2 million Australians directly employ, and they're giving
many others the opportunity besides that. They're keeping the wheels of the economy turning. They certainly are. And then you look through at how the Australian economy is operating, and you see that according to the GDP, the gross domestic product, services accounts for 62.7%, construction 7.4%, I'll come back to that, mining 5.8%, manufacturing 5.8%, the same, and agriculture 2.8%. Now, we once rode on the sheep's back, and our farmers are still critically important because they grow the food and fibre of the nation. They're being cruelled at every step of the way by this government, and the Greens don't ever believe in farmers anyway. They like to eat 3 times a day, but they do not believe in. It is true. They don't believe. Well, if you think it's true, please support and help them with policies that are going to help and support them, because the Greens aren't at the moment. But $500 billion of economic activity from small businesses, and that is just so important. And for taxation, there are many different methods of actually determining what a small business is. For taxation purposes, the Australian Taxation Office says a small business is one that has an aggregated turnover of under $10 million. There are other figures. There are some figures. The ABS says it's less than 20 workers. The Fair Work Australia says less than 15 employees. But we know and understand and grasp what a small business is. It's a small, often family-run enterprise, is employing people, having a go. Often that family business, they always put their workers and their entitlements and their superannuation before any consideration of their own. Often their workers are taking home more money than what in fact the owners of the business are. I see the Greens member nodding, thank you, and it's true. Often those small businesses don't take a holiday. It's tough. It is so tough to run a small business. When it comes to construction, it is so tough at the moment. We've got state governments that want to shut down the timber industry. We've got any number of compliance measures that the construction sector has to meet. Then we've got the cop on the beat. The ABCC has been stopped by this government, so we don't have those. So we've got unions running rampant on work sites. We do, and it is just so tough, and that is why the construction industry at the moment, when we've got a housing crisis because of all number of reasons, we've got record migration, we've got state governments and the Albanese government stymieing construction every step of the way. And then we've got a housing crisis. You can't find a house to buy, and if you could, and if they're that expensive, then of course you can't get into the market. We've got mortgage rates going up and up and up. It'll be interesting to see what the Reserve Bank does on Tuesday week as far as that's concerned. And then of course we've got rental properties. You cannot get a rental property to save yourself if you are in need of one. And we've got the construction sector in freefall. Of the 27,000 businesses that have gone bust under this government, the number of construction firms in that is alarming. It truly is. And the December 2024 quarter was the worst quarter for business insolvencies on record. 3,852 businesses going to the wall. So let me repeat that. 3,852 businesses went insolvent, went bust, went broke, gone bankrupt, call it what you like, the December 2024 quarter. That's just month before last. That is disgraceful. That is alarming. And if that isn't ringing some sort of warning bells in Treasury, in Cabinet, in the Lodge, then I don't know what is. You've got the price of staff wages, and Australia has the highest minimum wage in the world, and that is a good thing. That is a good thing, but it places pressure on people trying to keep the doors of business open. Overhead expenses, less foot traffic, making it so hard. There's only so much you can charge a cup of for a cup of coffee if you're a little cafe. Only so much you can charge for a pint of beer, media beer if you're a hotel. There's a better way. The coalition's got its plan to get the nation back on track, and hopefully we can form government at the next election and be able to do just that. But in that December 2024 quarter, and the statistics which came about as a result of that, which on the record for all to see, 57% of business owners reported feeling stressed due to financial pressures. And those financial pressures are cost of power, cost of just doing business. But power is a big thing, and we need to have an energy grid. We need to have a power market that is going to enable businesses to feel much more confident than they are now about turning the lights on and opening their doors and trying to do business, because at the moment it's overwhelming for them. And that figure, nearly 4,000 businesses going to the wall in the last quarter of last year, just shows just that. This particular legislation, Schedule 1 to the bill, it amends the Luxury Car Tax Act by tightening the definition. Now, the bill will change the definition of a fuel-efficient car by reducing the maximum fuel consumption to be considered fuel-efficient from 7 litres per 100 kilometres to 3.5 per 100. I do hope that the off-road fuel standards, fuel rebate at the moment, is not altered, because what we can't do is whack our farmers and our miners anymore. It was our farmers and our miners which kept this country going during COVID, when all the city types, the people in this place who represent city electorates, went home, pulled the doona up over their head and thought, woe is me. It was the people in regional Australia who kept this country going, kept the lights on, kept the balance of payments, kept the exports, kept food on the table, kept the wheels of the economy turning. Those people in regional Australia and in your electorate, Madam Speaker, they were the ones who we should praise every single day. We should thank 3 times a day, every day, because they're the ones who put the food on our table. And our farmers, they were the champions during COVID, and always doing the right thing by our nation. So that is why any fuel rebate, anything that they can get, as far as being able to ease the cost of living, ease just the job of opening of doing business, is welcomed and should be continued. Schedule 2 to the bill denies deductions for ATO interest charges, the general interest charge, GIC, and shortfall interest charge SIC. Now, as I say, deductions for interest rates, you just hark back to the 27,000 businesses that have gone bust under this government. We need to make it easier. We need to cut the red and the green tape that is just enveloping our business owners at the moment. They need encouragement. They need incentives. They need praise. They need to be able to have their bureaucracy eased, and yet what we find from this government is they just want to foist more work, more compliance, more paperwork onto them. It's making it more difficult for them to do business, those brave small business owners. Schedule 3 to the bill extends from a fortnight to 30 days the period within which the tax commissioner must notify a taxpayer of their decision to retain a refund amount arising from a business activity statement. Now, keep records, as Mr Bilson will say. Keep your tax records, have a good accountant, you'll get through your BAS. One thing that I always thought about with running a business is have a busier BAS, shows that you're busier running your business. And if you're paying tax, you're helping to fund those state schools, state hospitals, helping to keep the economy going. You're playing your part, you're doing the right thing, and it means that you're getting foot traffic through your business and hopefully making a profit. Now, the purpose of extending this period is to combat fraud and reduce the number of fraudulent refunds issued by giving the ATO more time to assess and verify potentially fraudulent BASs. Now, I'm going to give a little plug here to the member for Whitlam. I know he's a Labor member, but he and I ran a very good scams forum at Wagga Wagga, and I thank him for coming to my electorate. Because we were very bipartisan. At the end of the day, if it's preventing scams, particularly for elderly people, but certainly for businesses, then it has to be seen as a good thing. Then, I thank him again for coming to my electorate and doing that. Schedule 4 to the bill extends the $20,000 instant asset write-off by 12 months until June 30, 2025. Labor's proposal would limit the instant asset write-off to $20,000 and only provide an additional 12-month extension. Why don't they just put it into perpetuity? I know it's rolled out every budget just to make the government of the day look good, but we had an unlimited instant asset write-off when we were in government. It got more business happening. It was an incentive to businesses. This mob, they just want to limit it to $20,000. Miserable creatures that they are.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the Tax Incentives and Integrity Bill. The Greens are supporting this bill as it does two important things. Firstly, Schedule 1 of the bill lowers the fuel efficiency requirements for cars to be eligible for a higher luxury car tax threshold, so that only EVs and plug-in hybrids are eligible for the more generous LCT threshold. In 2008, the Greens and Labor negotiated the higher vehicle efficiency threshold as a design element within the luxury car tax in order to send a price signal to consumers choosing between higher and lower emitting vehicles. That standard was set at 7 litres per 100 k's, but given the natural technological improvements and emissions standards in major global car markets that oblige increasingly efficient vehicles, the current standard has been eroded over time and needs realigning now. The change proposed in this bill will remove internal combustion vehicles and their hybrids from the more generous threshold and refresh the intent of the original 2008 agreement. Schedule 2 of the bill will deny deductions on interest payments from ATO debts and, as a result, will correct a deeply regressive element of our income tax system whereby the Australian public effectively subsidises high-income earners' debt repayments to the tax office. Currently, people with incomes over $190,000 that have an ATO debt are able to deduct 45 cents in every dollar paid back on a debt, while a worker earning $45,000 a year can only receive a 16-cent discount on every dollar of interest paid to the ATO. Someone with a tax debt earning below $18,200 would have to pay the full amount back with no tax deductibility. The current system is deeply regressive. The current system is open to manipulation by financially literate high-income earners who can intentionally run up a debt to cover other life costs, knowing the Australian public will pick up almost half their tab, almost half of their interest charges. These two changes make the rest of the bill worth supporting because these are not measures that any coalition government, with their affection for higher pollution and economic inequality, would ever pursue. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. As I rise to speak to the Treasury Laws Amendment Tax Incentives and Integrity Bill 2024, I can't help but be struck by the thought that yet again here is another Frankensteinian monster of a bill, one that combines changes to the way fuel-efficient vehicles are treated under the luxury car tax system with provisions that would make the penalties attached to general interest charges and shortfall interest charges non-tax deductible, with an extension for the ATO from 14 to 30 days notification period for retaining funds, and finally the long-promised extension of the instant asset write-off for small businesses, which is being moved as an amendment by the government to this bill. Again, there's no logic in this legislation as it couples some pretty ordinary reforms in a way that makes it hard to vote against them, as the overall potential upside probably outweighs the potential downside, but it's still ugly. Let me explain. If we start at the beginning, in principle, the changes to the luxury car tax are welcome, not the least because these are way overdue. Yet the changes to the tax deductibility of the ATO penalties are problematic, as they're likely to be yet another measure that will disproportionately affect small businesses who are already struggling. Rather, the reform offered here does nothing to meaningfully assist small businesses to reduce their debts, but it will impact their cash flow. The ATO time extension then is probably neither here nor there, although it does seem to prioritise the needs of an agency over all others, while the extension of the instant asset write-off is quite simply something that can't come soon enough and potentially hasn't gone far enough in this iteration. In this scenario, the question I have to answer as the member for North Sydney is which side of the median line does the needle finally land on? Speaking firstly to the reform of the luxury car tax, Schedule 1 of this bill redefines fuel-efficient vehicles as those with fuel consumption not exceeding 3.5 litres per 100 kilometres, which is down from 7 litres per 100 kilometres, and aligns the indexation rates that apply to the fuel-efficient and other luxury car tax thresholds. While these changes are sensible, they're actually long overdue and not nearly ambitious enough to, in the Assistant Treasurer's own words, and I quote, foster a cleaner and more sustainable future. The introduction of the luxury car tax followed hot on the heels of the GST and was eventually designed to try and encourage people to consider local cars over high-end imports and to opt for the most fuel-efficient models. To encourage the latter, the tax is based on two thresholds in the 2024 financial year. A higher threshold of $91,387 for fuel-efficient vehicles, which are currently defined as vehicles with fuel consumption not exceeding 7 litres per 100 kilometres, and a lower threshold of $80,567 for all other vehicles. What this means is that businesses and individuals that sell or import a car pay 33% of the value of the car that exceeds the relevant threshold at the luxury car tax. However, this tax is now largely out of date and no longer incentivises the purchase of the most efficient vehicles possible. The introduction of the vehicle efficiency standards this year means car manufacturers are finally prioritising the importation of the most efficient vehicles they have in their line. And given this, the current definition allows many models that actually aren't the most efficient vehicles on the market at the moment to take advantage of the tax break. And it is time we close this loophole, in my opinion. Additionally, different indexing arrangements for the two thresholds have eroded the price advantage of the so-called fuel-efficient vehicles. These changes then are sensible, but the government could have gone further if they were truly committed to driving change. The first thing they could have done was to change the definition of fuel-efficient vehicles under the luxury car tax to zero emissions vehicles, rather than the proposed definition of 3.5 litres per 100 kilometres. And while that would have been bold, it's a change that would have ensured only the most fuel-efficient models, that is, those without an internal combustion engine, would benefit from the higher concessional threshold. Now, this would have also made the luxury car tax consistent with other federal legislation designed to encourage the uptake of more efficient vehicles, such as the fringe benefit tax exemption, which as of April this year is only available to zero emissions vehicles. In making this suggestion, though, I recognise that people living in regional and rural areas often have no choice but to purchase fossil-fuelled or hybrid vehicles, and I would not want to see them disadvantaged by legislative reform. Growing up in northwest New South Wales in the town of Coonabarabran, I'm incredibly aware that the charging infrastructure for zero-emissions vehicles is just not up to scratch in regional areas. So while being supportive of the introduction of targeted policies to increase clean vehicle uptake, I would argue we need targeted assistance to ensure the transition is equitable and that regional and rural Australians aren't left behind. The second way to amend the luxury car tax would be to remove the broad exemption for all utility vehicles, as it currently stands, this exemption is offered regardless of the reason why these vehicles are being purchased. Commercial vehicles are defined by the ATO as those designed for the principal purpose of carrying goods used for business or trade, and they are not subject to luxury car tax. Yet there's no requirement for someone who either owns or is choosing to buy one of these vehicles to demonstrate that the car is being purchased or used primarily for commercial purposes. Rather, the accepted test to determine the principal purpose of a utility vehicle rests on whether the passenger carrying capacity is less than 50% of the load carrying capacity. Now, according to the Australian Institute, this definition meant that every dual cab ute on the market in 2024 was exempt from the luxury car tax. And with the number of light commercial vehicle sales well outweighing the number of people who are registered as tradespeople nationwide, it's clear that not all purchases are for commercial reasons. And while I doubt what I'm about to say is going to make me popular, I would argue this loophole should be closed or replaced with a narrower definition of a commercial vehicle. There are simply far too many of these cars on the road in my electorate of North Sydney. I want to stress that this is something the Labor government should care deeply about, as under their watch, emissions are flatlined. To June 2024, emissions decreased by a measly 0.7% compared to the previous year. And while emissions reductions were recorded in stationary energy, agriculture, electricity and industrial process sectors, transport emissions continue to increase. All the modelling then supports the supposition that this is due in no small part to the trend towards the purchasing of SUVs, light commercial vehicles and heavy vehicles, which is something that our current tax system encourages. If the government wants to get serious about emissions reduction in our transport sector, they need to push for bolder reform to decarbonise transport, and fixing an inefficient tax that encourages the use of heavier, higher emitting vehicles for personal use, I would suggest is a good place to start. Ultimately, the changes contained in this bill are pretty pedestrian in terms of their ambition, with similar changes originally proposed as far back as 2019 by independent Senator Tim Storer when he was chair of the Senate Select Committee on EVs. And members of this crossbench have continued to advocate for them during this term. An ambitious transport agenda would have included removing the luxury car tax ute loophole, reforming the heavy vehicle road user charge or the fuel tax credit system, shifting to an equitable, transparent user pays road charger system, or encouraging active transport through tax-deductible ride-to-work allowances for employees. Yet none of these things are currently being pursued by this government. Instead, the changes being proposed here should and could have been made years ago, so it's a bit hard to get too excited by them. Turning to Schedule 2 of the bill, these changes will remove the ability of taxpayers to claim the general interest charge, also known as the GIC, and the shortfall interest charge, known as the SIC, penalties as tax deductions. While this proposal may seem innocuous, I have real concerns about the impact these changes will have, particularly on small, family-run businesses in Australia. Without transitional or accompanying safeguards, this measure risks being the literal straw that breaks the camel's back. And I ask the government to think very carefully before they make yet another bureaucratic change without fully thinking through the impact on the end user. In context, the ATO imposes these penalties on taxpayers who have either not paid their taxes on time or where a tax liability has been incorrectly assessed, resulting in a shortfall of tax paid. At the moment, if incurred, both the penalties are tax deductible, and some businesses and individuals may actually choose to cop them. Having spoken to people likely to be affected by this change, they don't do that lightly, but often have no choice as they are struggling with cash flow. In making these changes then, the government argues that penalties for non-compliance should not be tax deductible, and on the surface that seems reasonable. But the reality is far more complex, and whether it is intended to or not, this measure will disproportionately impact small, family-run businesses who currently owe about 2/3 of the collectible tax debt. And as I think everyone in this place knows, these people are already struggling. Recent research from CommBank found more than half of the small to medium-sized businesses in Australia are feeling stress of navigating the cost of living crisis, with 1 in 2 business owners reporting feeling stressed due to financial pressure. As the member for the 3rd largest business sector in the country, I hear about this stress every day. Small businesses tell me about the unhelpful and often stressful interactions they have with the ATO or external debt collection agencies, and I can't help but feel that whilst this change may seem like nothing much to the government, it sends yet another message to small and medium businesses that this government does not understand what you are facing or how you operate. Increasingly, the cost of tax debt, increasing the cost of tax debt will not help these businesses self-assess their tax liability more effectively. Rather, it risks accelerating the accumulation of tax liabilities of small businesses to unsustainable levels, forcing them to increase their reliance on accountants and financial advisors, which in turn drives up their costs of operating a business. While I acknowledge the Tax Commissioner will retain the discretion to remit the interest charges where they consider it is fair and reasonable to do so, say in the instance of financial distress, as I've outlined, I don't think that offers adequate protection, particularly in the current uncertain economic environment. To rely entirely on a Commissioner's discretion is to leave many Australian families and businesses at the whim of one decision. With all of that said, I would encourage the government to delay this measure and instead work with the small business community to find a solution that ultimately reduces the outstanding debt without accelerating current debts to unsustainable levels. For instance, rather than penalising generally compliant small businesses by denying them a deduction for GIC or SIC, the government could choose to invest more in an organisation such as the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, who in turn could then deliver better education and other services to actually help family-run businesses correctly self-assess their income tax liability. The government could choose a carrot rather than a stick. And at the same time, the OTA could then focus on implementing targeted debt collection measures that focus on high debt accounts. Sensible recommendations have been made by submitters to the Senate Standing Committee on Economics inquiry into this bill, and they do warrant further consideration by the government. They include clarifying whether the proposal applies to amended assessments issued on or after the 1st of July 2025 that are referable to income years beginning prior to the 1st of July 2025. Because as many of us know, many people run their tax accumulation 12 months behind. Creating a more level playing field for over and underpayment of tax and encouraging the accuracy and accountability of the ATO, excluding disputed debt subject to a 50-50 arrangement made before the announcement of this measure, and at the very least, retaining the deductibility of the SIC. Finally, I want to turn to the government amendment that we expect to see as this bill progresses through the House. It's an amendment that would finally legislate an extension of the instant asset write-off for small businesses through to the 30th of June 2025. And while I will certainly be supporting this amendment, the deferral of this measure, including the fact that it was removed from a bill which passed at the end of last year, has left small businesses in an uncertain position yet again. As the CEO for the Council of Small Business Organisations, Luke Ackerstrach, has said, many will feel like this is Groundhog Day, a painful reminder of the last financial year when the legislation was only passed a matter of days before the window for applications was due to expire. Ultimately, this government continues to seem to fail to understand that for this measure to work and to be effective for small businesses, they need certainty. It needs to be legislated, not just announced. The fact the government does not seem to get this point just shows how out of touch they really are with how small businesses operate. I reiterate my previous calls for a permanent, ongoing, instant asset tax write-off for small and family businesses with an increased threshold to at least $30,000. And for this reason, I will be supporting the member for Warringah's amendment to that effect. There seems to be no absence of voices in this place for big business. And as such, I would suggest many of them currently enjoy favourable operating environments. But if this government genuinely wants small businesses to thrive, making the instant asset write-off permanent and lifting the threshold would be a good place to start. And generally speaking, I would just encourage them to stop talking and start listening to this sector so we can get reform that makes it possible to have a successful small business environment in this country. Thank you.
I thank the member. The original question was that the bill now be read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Petrie has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to speak on the Treasury Law Amendments, Tax Incentive and Integrity Bill 2024. For many, this is essentially a little bit of an omnibus bill that brings together a number of schedules with very different areas that it touches on. The Omnibus Bill tries to close loopholes and encourage transition to electric vehicles in one of its schedule. So it has three key parts. First, it's tightening up the luxury car tax rules, but really does not go far enough. It introduces that only electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles qualify for tax breaks, but I will say more on that in a minute because there is an issue around this remaining area around plug-in hybrids. The second part of the bill removes the ability to deduct interest charges on tax liability, and third schedule extends the ATO's notification period for retaining BAS funds from 14 to 30 days. Some of these changes are necessary and overdue. However, there are concerns regarding unintended impacts, in particular in relation to the second schedule, the impacts on small business. So first of all, on the luxury car tax changes. Now we know from a decarbonisation point of view, transport is an area, it is a low-hanging fruit where we can and must accelerate our decarbonisation. The world is transitioning. We do not have a local car manufacturing, and so we have to, as a matter of urgency, move towards electric vehicles. There is a lot of misinformation as to the safety of electric vehicles and the range of electric vehicles. Much of that comes from those trying to hold on to fossil fuels and old combustion engines. The reality is a number of players in the field are improving the issue when it comes to access to charging facilities in regional as well as our urban areas. I know NRMA and others are installing a lot of fast charging. The reality is most average users don't do a huge number of kilometres, and the range of electric cars is absolutely sufficient. I have, for example, travelled by electric car from my electorate down to Canberra. I've gone to Jindabyne, to the Snowy Mountains. I've done a number of long journeys, and there is a really good network out there. And so this constant misinformation it seeds to drive doubt around range and encourages people to think that there has to be this holding on to the past when it comes to combustion vehicles and relying on ongoing fossil fuels. So we know the sector pathways, and the Climate Change Authority put out sectoral pathway recommendations, but they're really not sufficient. They're not driving enough ambition yet. We know when it comes to our transport sector, we need to get to net zero, and we have the ability to do that. The first and easiest is around passenger vehicles, and that fleet needs to get to net zero. And I've been on a number of inquiries, and the amount of misinformation is quite staggering, really, that still gets peddled out there. But the reality is the faster we transition to fully electric vehicles, the sooner we cut emissions and we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And we really cannot afford to delay. And there is a silver lining to this as well, which is the noise pollution. For anyone who has travelled in electric vehicles, they know, it's from a respiratory illnesses, from a noise, all of those aspects are improved so significantly. And we have developing more and more solutions when it comes to heavy transport as well, and that electrification. But this legislation, whilst it is closing a little bit of the loophole around the tax incentives and definitions around electric and plug-in hybrids. As I said, it's keeping this loophole for plug-in hybrids. Now, I know there are regional members of government that have been lobbying for keeping in plug-in hybrids into this legislation. And to me, it is stemmed from that misunderstanding and actually the lack of experience of actually driving in electric vehicles to understand that they actually deliver. For example, when it comes to the utes, I met with an Australian company up in, ironically, the electorate of the opposition leader in Dixon, a company, AUSEV, who are transitioning and making sure that we have fully electric heavy-duty utes that can work on mines and other sites. This is an incredibly, positive move, but of course they don't receive the support, I don't believe, from their local member. The reality is we have too many loopholes still too many people using passenger vehicles and utes that aren't, not always for a commercial or a trade use. And these are heavy, dangerous vehicles on our roads and high-emitting vehicles. And so this loophole for utes that remains in this legislation is bad and needs to be addressed, and I urge the government to address this. Stand up, put forward some serious plans to enable that transition to happen and close that loophole when it comes to that. The next schedule addresses the extension for the ATO's notification period for retaining refunds relating to the BAS statements in an important measure to combat fraud. With scams becoming more sophisticated, especially through social media, it's even more critical. As I understand it from the Minister, the measure will provide the Australian Tax Office with the breathing room they need to investigate and crack down on fraudulent statements. I support this, and so this measure appears to be fairly well-founded, especially if it supports efforts to uphold tax integrity. I am concerned, though, around protecting small business. So many in this place talk a big game in terms of small business, but the reality is, both from the major parties, opposition or in government, big business has their ear, and all too often small business is mentioned. There's a lot of talk, but very little action when it actually comes to, in fact, standing up or putting proposals, detailed proposals that will actually help small business. So the question around this removal of interest deductibility on tax liabilities, look, I support improvements to tax integrity, but we must ensure when we're closing loopholes, we're not in fact making it even harder for small businesses to survive. So there is a risk of disproportionately through this change impacting small businesses who are already struggling with cash flow. And while under this proposal, the ATO will retain flexibility to remit in cases of financial hardships, it requires discretion from the ATO. And the feedback I get from small businesses in Warringah is they are not seeing any discretion or flexibility from the ATO. In fact, they are seeing a crackdown that makes it incredibly hard for them to remain operating. So to ensure that we do actually have sensible things that help small business, we need to make sure I have amendments to suggest to this legislation to actually improve it. The government circulated an amendment to extend the instant asset write-off until 30 June 2025. Now, we've been having a debate about this instant asset write-off for some 2 years now, and it's really unacceptable that the delay has meant small businesses can't rely on it. They have no certainty and they cannot make investment decisions for their business knowing that this is going to be available to it, because it simply hasn't been. It's on the table, it gets announced, but then the legislation to give it effect isn't there. So a small business struggling with their cash flow cannot legitimately commit to an investment or a spending on the assumption that they may be able to write off that asset, but then not be able to because the government and the opposition have not come together to pass the legislation necessary. So it's really important that businesses get that certainty. This is a measure that's been announced for a number of years now, and I've been trying to amend it for a number of years to give businesses more certainty, not last-minute slapdash amendments, especially now when we're looking at it last sitting weeks before an election possibly. So I support that we are the government again introducing it, but I think we need to think about the quantum. Now, 20,000 does not really support small businesses in terms of investing into their new machinery or businesses, things that will actually make a difference. They, in fact, need that asset write-off threshold, and that's why I move an amendment to, I will be moving an amendment in consideration in detail to increase that from 20,000 to 50,000. That is what they're asking for. They're saying meaningfully for investment into infrastructure or plants or areas, anything that will genuinely assist with the efficiencies of their businesses, that is where the threshold needs to be. It also needs to be made permanent. They need certainty. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. In Warringah alone, we have over 8,000 small businesses and 12,000 sole traders. They're driving innovation, creating jobs, they're strengthening our local economy. Just last week, I met with a group of small businesses and the Chambers of Commerce, and they are quite desperate. I can't convey that to the government clearly enough. They spoke of the impact these issues and other changes are having on their operations. They're feeling the increasing amount of regulation coming through, that the government is making it impossible to run a small business. They don't feel like they are cared for by the major parties or by the government at the moment. There is no assistance provided to help them wrestle with increasing pressures from an unstable economy. Now, their issues range from their operations, the costs of compliance, the IR changes, the amount of changes in the last few years have made it impossible for them to keep up. And the compliance, of course, the ATO being tough. Also, the staffing shortage and the changes that have happened around immigration and visas, for example, have also made it harder for them to be able to sponsor visas. The cost of sponsoring staff to come and fill vacancies to be able to operate is huge. And these are all areas that chip away at the viability of small businesses. And the numbers don't lie. Just last year, in the last financial year, ASIC reported that small business in construction, retail, hospitality made up the majority of insolvencies. There have been many discussions, as I said, about in this place about small business, but we need to actually get on to action. Productivity Commission, in their Advancing Prosperity report, increasingly from business groups as well, have argued that greater productivity measures are needed to help our economy and get small to medium-sized businesses moving. So that can be paired with deregulation measures that favour small businesses, such as meaningful taxation reform and simplification on compliance reporting. Small businesses have also continued to advocate for an increase to the limit of the instant asset write-off. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry said that a 20,000 threshold does not provide the necessary economic stimulus needed for small business. The National Electrical and Communications Association argued that the cost of essential technical equipment far exceeds this limit and an increase to the threshold of 50,000 is necessary. So whilst 20,000 may enable a small business to purchase small, short-lived assets such as computers for an office, fridge, kitchen, those kind of items, it's not sufficient for meaningful investment into equipment, plant and machinery, which will provide substantial productivity benefits. Ultimately, we have growing economic uncertainty and we need to get rid of that risk element by making sure there is certainty, and that is why making the instant asset write-off permanent is essential, so we don't get into political argy-bargy that means it's on again, off again. We know that is so damaging. Whilst I support overall this legislation, I will be moving amendments to support small businesses in consideration in detail, and I urge the government close the loopholes on the luxury car tax and get on with incentivising clean net zero transport, and don't keep the room in for dirty fossil combustion engines that do nothing to decarbonise Australia.
I thank the member. The original question was that the bill now be read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Petrie has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Longman.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Treasury Laws Amendment, Tax Incentives and Integrity Bill 2024. Deputy Speaker, last year there were a record number of small business closures in this nation, over 13,000, and over 27,000 since this government was elected. More than any time, including the pandemic, which is hard to believe. And at this most difficult of times for small businesses, this government's response is to impose more pain on businesses, many on the brink of closure. Schedule 2 of this bill proposes the removal of the tax deductibility of interest paid on late tax debts. I've got news for this government. They're late paying the tax bill because they're struggling and their cash flow is tight. Taking away this tax deductibility is like kicking someone when they're down. The other people it affects is the workers in these small businesses. The extra financial burden by removing this tax deductibility from small business means they will have to take the money from the only controllable cost you have in business, wages. So much for being the supposed party of the worker. This proposed measure is seen as such a threat to the small business community that Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, the Institute of Public Accountants, National Tax and Accountants Association and the Self-Managed Superannuation Fund Association made a joint submission calling for Schedule 2 to be removed from the bill entirely. Their submission found that it is unlikely that increasing the cost of special interest charges, or SIC, will impact an entity's ability to correctly self-assess their tax liability, and the current cost of general interest charges, or GIC, means that many taxpayers already have a strong incentive to pay tax on time. That making SIC and GIC non-deductible will inappropriately increase compliance costs of honest taxpayers. that there are already a wide range of targeted measures that the ATO can undertake to improve the collection of tax debt, and the latest annual report indicates that such measures are beginning to make an impact. Certified Practising Accountants Australia made a similar submission urging the government to reconsider this proposal. CPA Australia say that denying these deductions will create undue financial hardship for small businesses and individuals, exacerbating existing challenges and the current economic climate. This is an indiscriminate measure that fails to address situations where taxpayers have historically done the right thing, or through no fault of their own, accrue these charges due to legitimate tax disputes or administrative delays. In their explanatory memorandum, the government points to the ability for a taxpayer to apply for a remission of an interest charge, that is, to ask for it to be waived. But stakeholders report the measure comes at a time of long delays in ATO service delivery and inconsistent outcomes on remission requests. Disputing decisions is already time-consuming and costly, and will become more costly with the risk of non-deductibility if a remission request is denied. These delays from the ATO will now cost taxpayers even more. This government's decision to introduce this measure, despite widespread criticism, shows that the business community should have no confidence that this government can consult, and no confidence this government listens. The second hit to small business and to all Australians is to those who choose not to purchase an EV because there is no EV option to tow their caravan, load up their tools, no charging stations where they live, or not enough range. Is Schedule 1, where the luxury car tax threshold will be increased to $91,387 only if the vehicle achieves under 3.5 litres per 100 kilometres. This means Land Cruisers, Patrols and the like will not qualify for the new luxury car tax threshold. Surprise, surprise. Only EVs will qualify. Another example of this government trying to force their ideologies on the Australian people, whether it suits their lifestyle or not. The Coalition will move amendments so that Australians who choose to purchase a vehicle that suits their lifestyle will not be discriminated against for making this choice. When I talk to everyday Australians and longmen, they tell me that if people choose to buy an EV, they respect their right to do that, if that's what suits their lifestyle. And all they expect is they be shown the same respect when they make a choice on purchasing a vehicle that suits their lifestyle. This latest proposed measure, coupled with the first tranche of the much-hated ute tax that came in on the 1st of January, is simply hitting hard-working Australians when many of them are doing it tougher than they ever have before. Schedule 3 again punishes small business through cash flow. Currently, if there's an error in the amount of tax paid through the BAS system, the refund is issued within 14 days. This bill proposes that be extended to 30 days. The measure is in response to a recent and new practice of fraud through social media. However, as is the practice of Labor governments, the innocent are punished along with the guilty, rather than manage by exception and more severely punish the offenders with stiffer penalties. If we must go down this path, minimally, interest should be paid on monies owed to the entity over 14 days. Although Schedule 4 of the bill, which reinstates the $20,000 instant asset write-off for small business for the 24-25 financial year, will be welcomed by the small business community, small business owners see it for what it is: pure politics leading into an election. Instead of legislating this earlier in the term because it's the right thing to do to help small businesses, this Labor government will bring this in with the alleged financial impacts to be felt after the election. Again, thinking purely of the politics and not the actual impact this has on small business and their workers. The Coalition will move amendments that increases the threshold to $30,000 and make it permanent to give business certainty, which they certainly need more of in uncertain times. Deputy Speaker, it's like this government meets every day and tries to find ways to punish small business and their workers. In contrast, we see them rubbishing the Coalition's recent announcement allowing small businesses to claim up to $20,000 for business-related meal and entertainment expenses. Labor keep poo-hooing this, saying it's free lunches for bosses. What rubbish. The people that will benefit most from this measure are the workers. In fact, some of the lowest paid workers. It will mean that cafes and others in the hospitality industry that are currently struggling under this homegrown cost of living crisis we are currently in will need to increase hours for employees to meet the extra demand. It will be the difference for some small businesses in having a Christmas party, if they can claim the expense, which will be exempt from the fringe benefit tax. This will boost morale, leading to increased productivity, which will benefit the entire country. Deputy Speaker, I've never seen a government more anti-business than this one, at a time when a recent study by MyOb reports that 1/3 of small business owners cannot pay themselves due to cash flow issues, and a quarter have resorted to using their personal savings just to stay afloat. Only the Coalition understands what small business needs, and if elected, we will ensure that small businesses and their employees will flourish and prosper. It's time to get Australia back on track.
I thank the member. The original question was that the bill now be read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Petrie has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Wentworth.
Deputy Speaker, myself and other crossbenchers are getting pretty sick of this kind of behaviour from this government. We're repeatedly presented with these omnibus Treasury bills that package controversial reforms in with policies that are undoubtedly positive. This, we can only infer, is to prevent proper discussion of the issues. This bill has four provisions, 3 of which are good and 1 of which is terrible. The first part of the bill introduces a luxury car tax. It introduces luxury car tax, which I and many others have been advocating for a long time and is a completely no-brainer. It updates the definition of a fuel-efficient car to 3.5 litres per 100 kilometres from the 7 litres per 100 kilometres. It also indexes a luxury car threshold in line with regular vehicles. So this amendment to the current luxury car tax is welcome. The third extends the ATO notification period for retaining runs in further investigation. Again, sensible. And the fourth extends the instant asset write-off for small businesses until June 2025, an election commitment and, again, a no-brainer. But it is the second part of this bill, the chapter that removes deductions for interest charges on GIC and SIC, that is highly problematic. I see this as an unnecessary change that will remove the ability of businesses to deduct their general interest charge and their shortfall interest charge. By Treasury's own admission, this will overwhelmingly impact small businesses that are already doing it tough. This chapter of the bill has been panned by accountant groups and small businesses alike. Now, I understand that on the face of this measure seems sensible. It creates an incentive to tax on time, which I support. But the timing of this legislation is extremely poor, given the rapid growth of small business insolvencies in recent years, with cash flow described as the #1 cause of these insolvencies, according to ASIC. There just isn't the evidence that these systems are being exploited by small businesses as a cheap form of credit. The government knows this is an unpopular move, and that is why it has unpackaged this legislation in with a handful of other measures that it is difficult for this parliament not to pass. And the government should be focusing on measures that actually make it easier for small businesses to flourish right now. Last year, myself and other crossbenchers wrote to the government and said that IR complexity and regulatory complexity more broadly are some of the biggest barriers to the growth of small businesses. It's one of the biggest reasons that small businesses are not hiring people and in some cases are shutting down. We wrote to the government and argued that they should increase the threshold of the definition of small business from a sort of arbitrary 15 workers under the Fair Work in the Fair Work Acts, from 15 employees to 25 employees at the least. Because if you're a small business and you have, particularly if you have mainly part-time or casual workers, 15 employees isn't very much. You're not going to have all the HR support to be able to make sure that you can, still work on all these, still manage all the sort of complexity of the IR legislation. Now, that this is what the government should do. This is something that would make a difference to small businesses right now, and the government should be trying to support small businesses rather than punish them. Thank you.
I thank the member. The original question was that the bill now be read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Petrie has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. The immediate question is that the amendment be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. All those against? No? The ayes have it? The ayes have it.
Ayes have it. Just wait.
Were there any noes to... Okay, I'll ask the question again. The immediate question is that the amendment by the member for Petrie be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Noes have it. Noes have it. Okay. Is a division required? Division is required, as is necessary to resolve this question to enable further questions to be considered in relation to this bill in accordance with Standing Order 195. The bill will be returned to the House for further consideration. I call the clerk.
Government business. Order of the day number 3. Commonwealth Workplace Protection Orders Bill 2024. Resumption of debate on second reading.
And I call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on this Commonwealth Workplace Protections Order, Bill 2024. And it does mimic similar pieces of legislation in my home state of Queensland. For example, the Peace and Good Behaviour Act of 1982, which gives people the right to peace and quiet and undisturbed by threats and quality of life and to their well-being as well. Orders can be made in a magistrate's court keeping peace and good behaviour. On application, a person can be a complainant there and for a duration of years. The second piece of legislation that's not dissimilar to this particular legislation is indeed the Queensland Domestic and Family Violence Protection Act of 2012, protection of a person against violence committed or threatened by someone else if there's a relevant relationship existing between the parties. And so we've used there's similar legislation in the various states and territories. And so this legislation that's before the chamber is the kind of legislation that will protect Commonwealth workers, but also allow judges and magistrates, if I can put it like that, to have access to similar jurisprudence, to look at the kind of orders and cases that have been dealt with and judgments that have been dealt with in similar circumstance. I want to speak on this Commonwealth Workplace Protection Orders Bill and say at the very beginning, every Australian deserves to be safe at work. And in recent times, we've seen Commonwealth workers increasingly subject to acts of violence and aggression from members of the public. It's simply unacceptable, and that's why the Albanese Labor government is introducing this bill. We want to make it plain that those workplaces in which our Commonwealth public servants, the workers that serve the Australian community working are safe. So legislation strengthens the Commonwealth's ability to protect Commonwealth employees, particularly those in the front line, who are the very people that are dealing often in some really difficult circumstances with someone that may not be getting what they want and may be frustrated with their particular circumstances in which they're living. Violence and aggression can have a devastating impact on frontline workers and their families, as well as on the broader safety and operation of Commonwealth workplaces. So we're acting on advice here, and the bill builds on extensive work that we've undertaken. There was a horrific stabbing attack on an Airport West Services Australia officer in May 2023, and that was a devastating reminder that we need to do more to protect workers. In response, the former Minister for Government Services and NDIS commissioned a review into the safety of frontline public service workers, the Services Australia Security Risk Management Review, which was conducted in 2023 by the former Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, Graham Ashton. This comprehensive review recommended 44 changes, and they are to deter acts of aggression against workers and increase safety in the workplaces. So we committed as a government to implement every one of those recommendations of the Ashton Review. Commonwealth frontline workers help the Australian community, and there's a whole range of areas we could think of them. Centrelink, the Taxation Office, Passport Offices, airports, Commonwealth Electoral Commission. They staff service centres and call centres across the country, and they're amongst the first frontline person of the Australian government that a member of the committee can interact with. They often deal with emergencies and natural disasters as well. So, unfortunately, the Commonwealth workers and workplaces continue to face this increasing risk of violence. Between 2023 and July 2024, that whole year, Service Australia staff experienced nearly 1,700 serious instances of violence and aggression. The bill responds to this unacceptable situation. The implementation of Recommendation 17 of the Ashton Review creates the Commonwealth Workplace Protection Order, a WPO scheme, and progresses the government's commitment to implement all 44 recommendations. The recommendations of the review state the current Act workplace protection provision should be adopted for use by the Commonwealth staff as a staff protection mechanism nationwide. The bill establishes a framework to enable an authorised person within the Commonwealth entity to apply to a state or territory magistrate or local court, federal court or the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia to issue a Commonwealth WPO in order to protect a Commonwealth worker or workplace from threats of harm and actual harm. Effectively, this means that a person who causes harm or threats to cause harm to a Commonwealth worker or workplace can be subject to a WPO. Establishes a new Principal Act, introduces the scheme, and the scheme is crucial to mitigating some of the serious harm. Ultimately, a WPO is aimed at preventing future violence from happening. These orders aim to stop a person from accessing a particular Commonwealth workplace or from contacting a specific worker if there has been violence or aggression in the past. The bill will make Commonwealth workplaces safe for the public who visit them to gain access to critical Commonwealth benefits and services. This bill will provide legal protections for Commonwealth workplaces and workers and deter acts of violence and other harmful behaviours by members of the public. The scheme will be available to most Commonwealth workplaces, extending to anywhere a Commonwealth worker is conducting official Commonwealth work. And that's, for example, I mentioned about emergency services and indeed in natural disasters, where someone from Services Australia might be at, for example, a community centre and delivering services for those much needed financial supports that are given from the Commonwealth during those times. The Commonwealth workplaces include pop-up service centres and shopping centres, Commonwealth service delivery vehicles and Commonwealth workers' residence away from home. So the WPO includes someone's home. Protects workers who are working on behalf of the Commonwealth regardless of where they are. The bill enables an authorised person from the Commonwealth entity to apply for a court for a WPO on behalf of the Commonwealth worker or workplace where personal violence against a worker or workplace has taken place and is connected to the worker's official duties, and where there is a risk it will occur again if an order is not made. The bill's definition of personal violence is designed to include, and it's designed very similar, by the way, to that domestic and family violence legislation in Queensland and mimicked throughout the states and territories, and indeed the Peace and Good Behaviour Act in Queensland, because it includes acts of violence, harassment, intimidation, threats of harm or other harmful non-physical violence, such as verbal abuse over the phone or via an email. On application, a Commonwealth, state or territory court can make an interim or a final WPO. In circumstances where urgent protection is required, the Commonwealth entity can write to the court to issue an urgent interim WPO to ensure protections are in place as quickly as possible. And it can be done by telephonic or electronic means before a future court date considers a final order, which I think is a very sensible approach. And the court can be, if it's satisfied that there's been personal violence under the definition, or there's a risk that the respondent will engage in personal violence. If an order is not made, the order is necessary or desirable can be made. In making that order, the court can is empowered to impose a range of conditions. The conditions can include no contact with the Commonwealth worker or no attendance at that workplace. The definition of Commonwealth worker covers a whole range of people, and I alluded to it before. It's defined, of course, by the Public Governance, Performance and Accountability Act, as which particular Commonwealth entities are covered, but they include, as I mentioned, Services Australia, Taxation Office, Veterans Affairs, Australia Post, electorate and ministerial officers as well. It includes contractors as well, which I think is a good idea. So hard-working security guards and cleaners and other external staff are covered. And while the safety of Commonwealth workers come first, we want to make sure anyone who engages with the government and government services has the right to be protected as well. A plan can be developed to ensure that they continue to access those services safely. Doesn't mean to say a person loses their entitlement to Centrelink payments or family tax benefits or any form of government services. A plan can be put in place how they can do it, and those conditions can be put in place with the assistance of the department, relevant department, of course, the court as well. In some circumstances, a condition may limit interactions to appointments over the phone, and that can be done. This will take a bit of work, but it's necessary. And the bill allows either party to a WPA to apply to a court to revoke or vary. It shouldn't be ad infinitum, it shouldn't be infinity. There are terms and conditions. A final WPO can't exceed 2 years or be made against a person who's under 14 years of age. So there needs to be flexibility about how this is done. And breaching a WPO can constitute a criminal offence, as it can happen in other circumstances, in other jurisdictions. It's very similar. And there's 120 penalty units or imprisonment for up to 2 years or both. So we think that's a penalty for non-compliance. The bill also requires the Minister to cause a review of the operation and effectiveness of the Act as soon as practical, 3 years after commencement. And I think this bill completes a legislative gap. So in conclusion, Deputy Speaker, I think this is an important step in creating safer Commonwealth workplaces and sends a strong message that the Albanese government values workers. Violence and aggression towards workers is unacceptable, and WPAs are a significant tool in keeping workers safe. The bill builds on the layers of protection the Commonwealth has provided for workers. This bill increases penalties, and as I say in the previous legislation, the Commonwealth Code amendments protecting Commonwealth Frontline Workers Act of 2024. The Act increases criminal penalties for assaults against Commonwealth frontline workers and implements recommendation 18 of the Ashton Review. So I say, Deputy Speaker, this is a good outcome. I did visit the Ipswich office of Services Australia in my electorate last year to meet the workers and thank them for their fantastic work, and particularly their work in slashing the backlogs of Centrelink and Medicare claims and improving customers' experience. We have boosted 3,000 frontline workers across the country, including 500 in South East Queensland and quite a number in Ipswich. So they do great work, and they deserve to be safe in their workplace and an environment free from harm. This bill will protect those kind of workers and the workers in Ipswich in the Services Australia Centre there. I want to thank them for their service to our local community. I thank the former Minister for Government Services for his support of the bill and commend it to the Chamber.
I thank the member. The question is that the bill now be read a second time. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Ayes. Those against, no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to establish a workplace protection order scheme in relation to Commonwealth workers and Commonwealth workplaces and for related purposes.
If no member wishes to consider the bill in detail, I will put the report question immediately. The question is that the bill be reported to the House without amendment. All those of that opinion say aye. Those against, I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 4, resumption of debate on a condolence motion for the Honourable Anthony John Messner.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Sturt.
Thank Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I take the opportunity to pay tribute to Tony Mesner in contributing to this condolence motion. Yesterday in the House, the Prime Minister and Opposition Leader were able to put some very poignant comments on the record about Tony's career and time in this Parliament. He, of course, was a South Australian Senator, and as a South Australian, I want to make a few comments, but also I never met Tony Mesner, which is quite surprising because I have two quite significant connections to him. By the time I became active in the South Australian Liberal Party, he had moved to the south coast of New South Wales. But when he was a senator, my mother actually worked for him, and that put her on the path to meeting my father. Thus, thanks to Tony Mesner, I'm standing before you today in this Parliament. So we've got him to hold to account for their Deputy Speaker. And also, Tony Mesner served as the Administrator of Norfolk Island, and I grew up for a few years on Norfolk Island, funnily enough, in the late 1980s when my father was the Chief Administrative Officer over there. So his service in Norfolk Island I can connect with, as well as the fact that my family probably owes him their existence to his election to the Senate. Tony was elected in the infamous 1975 election that was brought about by the dismissal of the Whitlam government, and in no way am I undermining my leader, Mr Dutton, who says that the upcoming election is the most important in generation. He's right about that, but boy, that 1975 election was pretty significant for many reasons, particularly for the future of parliamentary democracy. Indeed, we were in a very precarious situation when the Governor-General made the very sensible and relieving decision to dismiss a government that was seeking to govern without the consent of the Parliament, effectively committing crimes against the Constitution of our own country, and the people of Australia made it very clear what they thought about that when they had the chance to vote at the ballot box in December of 1975. So Tony was elected at that election, and I think I've had the opportunity to, being very much a political nerd, wouldn't surprise anyone here, to speak to a few people that contested that 1975 election, and it is quite fascinating to hear those first-hand accounts of what it was like to be in that contest. It was probably the most dramatic of elections that this country has ever seen, and genuinely I hope will ever see, because the tension and the division in our country around that election is not what we want in our democratic contests. We want spirited contests, but we don't want them to rip our country apart, and hopefully that's the one and only time that we see anything of that great significance. Tony was elected at that election. He served for 15 years in the Senate, and one thing I really just wanted to single out about his contribution, which I think we could all pay tribute to him by thinking ourselves how we could do more and follow his example, is how much he cared for and shone a spotlight on the need for us to do better by small businesses in this country. And I really feel like I spend way too much time as a member of this Parliament in debates around legislation that is putting more pressure, more restriction, more red tape, more regulation on small businesses. And if Tony Mesner was here, he would be calling that out at every opportunity. That was what he did through his career, and that's what I think we need to strongly reconsider in our own careers in this place, just how we find opportunities not to put more burden on the small business sector, but in fact take it off and make it easier for them. And as the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader reflected on Tony Mesner's career yesterday, and as they talked about his great policy achievements in Veterans Affairs and many other areas, beyond question in small business, and trying to successfully and many times find ways to make life easier for small businesses, was the great legacy of his career here. I always thank business people when I go and visit their businesses and they're employing people and being successful. And some of them are a bit surprised because they're not used to receiving any gratification from government, but we're so lucky to have the small business sector taking a risk, putting their capital on the line, employing people, giving them a wage so that they can support their families, growing our economy, paying taxes that provide the society that we're also lucky to enjoy in this country. And there's a little too much now, and there's always a little too much of a lack of appreciation for the small business sector in particular, sole traders or businesses with a few employees who take enormous risk and who make this country and the economy of this country what it is. And that was something that Tony understood very intuitively. And he didn't just understand it, he effectively said, well, while I'm here in this parliament, that's the thing I want to really have as my focus. But we all have things that we're interested in and that we pursue in this building, and they've all got credibility, and it's important that individual members pick up causes and policy priorities and objectives that they want to shine a spotlight on. But the fact that Tony's was the small business sector is something that does him great credit, and is something that I want to reinforce in this condolence motion. We thank him for his service to South Australia. As a South Australian Liberal Party member, I thank him for his service to the Liberal Party. He served with great distinction in the true spirit and traditions of the Liberal Party, and a senator in that House as the House of Review. He made a great contribution. He leaves a great legacy. Vale Tony Mesner.
I thank the member. I understand it is the wish of honourable members to signify at this stage of respect and sympathy by rising in their places, and I ask all present to do so. I thank the Federation Chamber. Member for Hasluck.
I ask leave of the Federation Chamber to move that further proceedings be conducted in the House.
Is leave granted?
Leave is granted. I move that further proceedings be conducted in the House.
Is the motion seconded? Thank you. The question is that further proceedings be conducted in the House. All those of that opinion say aye. I think the ayes have it. I call the clerk. Call the member for Hasluck again.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
Is the motion seconded?
Thank you.
Fowler.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I still remember visiting Fairfield Hospital back in 2019 and was really shocked to learn that the hospital, the doctors and nurses were still using clipboards, writing patients' details by hand. Why? Because the answer was they had no Wi-Fi, no electronic records. The hospital didn't have enough electricity capacity load to support it. I couldn't believe it. In modern Australia, our frontline health workers were relying on pen and paper. I fought for change, and today Fairfield Hospital is better with upgraded technology that helps doctors and nurses care for patients more efficiently. But the truth is, we still have a long way to go. Fairfield Hospital still don't have an MRI machine. Patients are still being sent to Liverpool Hospital, which is already overcrowded. And our hand clinic, one of the only ones serving not just Western Sydney, but the entire Pacific region, is operating on a demountable, a temporary structure for critical healthcare service. The New South Wales Labor government promised $500 million for Fairfield Hospital in 2023. But instead of funding urgently needed improvements, most of that money is going towards yet another master plan. Our community doesn't need a master plan. We need action. Then there's Medicare. When Medicare was introduced in the 1980s, it was groundbreaking. It meant Australians could see a doctor without worrying about cost. But today, it's broken. Doctors are struggling to keep their clinics open. Patients are struggling to afford a visit. Here's the reality. Bulk billing rates in New South Wales have dropped to 37.2%. The average out-of-pocket fee is now about $42.44, and 37% of doctors are charging over $90 for a 20-minute consultation. But there's something we don't talk enough about. A doctor's consultation isn't always 10 minutes. Medical science has advanced. We now understand complex diseases that take time to diagnose. And in a community like Fowler, a doctor's visit isn't just about symptoms, it's about trust. Patients don't walk in and immediately list their symptoms. They talk about family, mental health struggles, gambling addiction, financial stresses, because that's how they build their trust with their doctor. Yet under the current Medicare system, doctors are forced to rush through consultations, financially penalising if they spend more than 10 minutes with a patient. The cost of inaction. For many families in Fowler, $42.44 could contribute to their groceries, which we know has increased dramatically, but many are prepared to skip a doctor's visit. They wait until it's too late. And then they end up in emergency, putting even more pressure on our already overwhelmed hospitals. Dr. Seng Lim, another Western Sydney GP, has started using remote monitoring to keep patients out of hospitals. It's innovative, it's effective, and yet Medicare doesn't cover it. Why? Why are we forcing families to choose between their health and their next meal? Why are we ignoring solutions that could prevent hospital overcrowding? The government talks about increasing Medicare rebates, but let's be clear, those increases only apply to children under 16 and those on healthcare card holders. What about middle Australians? How do they cope with the rising cost of living and high healthcare costs? So I call on the Anthony Albanese government to take real action. Increase Medicare rebates for GPs. The Royal Australian College of GPs has called for a 20% rebate increase for longer consultations. Incentivise doctors to work in communities like Fowler, just like regional doctors receive extra support. We need a similar tier for GPs in lower socioeconomic areas. This will help attract, retain doctors so families don't have to wait to travel to wait for care. Invest in preventative care. Medicare should cover remote monitoring and community health programs, keeping people healthier and reducing hospital strain. Because healthcare should not be a privilege, it should be a priority. I don't want to hear another story about a mother who can't afford to take her child to the doctor. I don't want to hear about another GP closing their doors because they can't afford to stay open. And I certainly don't want to hear about another government spending money on plans instead of fixing real problems. We need action now, because no one should suffer just because they can't afford a doctor. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the Federation Chamber does adjourn, and I call the member for Dobell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Since coming to office, our Labor government has been focused on strengthening Medicare. And after a decade of cuts and neglect under the former Liberal government, we have seen a big increase. We've seen a stabilisation in bulk billing. We've seen a big increase of nearly 8% in communities like mine. We've seen the opening of new services. We've seen the opening of new services like urgent care clinics and Medicare mental health centres. And as a pharmacist, as a regional MP, and as the Assistant Minister for Regional and Rural Health and Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, I know there is more to do, but I also know that after a decade of cuts and neglects, we have made progress. I note the Deputy Speaker, in your community, in Bendigo, the big increase in bulk billing that we've seen since the tripling of the bulk billing incentive. And as I said, as a registered pharmacist, someone who was a chief pharmacist of our local hospital, someone who's worked in healthcare my whole life, I know there is more to do, but I'm so really pleased to see what we've been able to achieve so far, and I also know what's at risk if we weren't re-elected. And I think it's important to remember, it was the Hawke Labor government that established Medicare 41 years ago, and it was opposed at every point. We've gone to elections about Medicare. We've been taken to the court about Medicare. Only Labor believes in Medicare, believes in universal healthcare, believes in healthcare for all Australians, wherever they live and whatever they can afford. At the last election, we committed to 2 Medicare urgent care clinics on the Central Coast. And in late 2023, the Yamina and Lake Haven Medicare urgent care clinics opened, offering free walk-in urgent care 7 days a week over extended hours. And since opening, I'm so pleased to update the House, the Lake Haven Medicare urgent care clinic has seen more than 15,000 people. 15,000 local people have been able to have walk-in, free, quality care. And it's also important to let the House know that almost a third of those are children under 15.
It's become a trusted alternative to the emergency department, particularly for families. Almost a third of those visits are out of hours, where people would otherwise have been forced to go to the already stretched emergency department, making such a big difference in the community that I live in and represent. Recently, Deputy Speaker, I was pleased to officially launch the Medicare Mental Health Centre in Tuggerah Business Park, offering free walk-in mental health support and care for everyone. And I note my colleague, the member for Macquarie, Susan Templeman, who's here, a really strong and passionate advocate for mental health services, and was delighted to also have the opportunity to be at the official opening of the service in your community as well. This is making such a big difference to people in communities right across the country. Free walk-in care, without needing a referral, without having to wait for an appointment, to be able to access psychologists, counsellors and social workers. And as the Assistant Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, I was so pleased to be able to secure nearly an additional $30 million to establish a virtual network of psychologists and psychiatrists available in every centre. So if someone walks into the centre in Richmond, in Macquarie, or they walk into the centre in Tuggerah on the Central Coast, they will be connected to a network of specialist psychiatrists and psychologists to be able to meet their needs, making such a big difference. I've worked in mental health and health for all of my working life. We have worked collaboratively with the states and territories, with service providers, with clinicians, to be able to reform mental health and suicide prevention in Australia. Soon we will have a new national early intervention service where anyone in distress who needs support can call up over the phone or video and be able to be given that earlier intervention. We know the earlier the intervention, the less the impact and duration of their distress. We're also, as I mentioned, rolling out Medicare mental health centres where someone can go free, walk in, without an appointment, without a referral, to get wraparound support and care. Because we know that sometimes the best support that someone needs is holistic wraparound support and care. Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned, as someone who has worked in acute mental health inpatient units at Wyong Hospital in my electorate, I cannot express the profound difference that putting mental health in the heart of Medicare and putting services in the heart of communities is making to people right around the country. And I just wanted to finish with the story of Ken from Gladstone.
The member's time has expired. I would like to remind members present in the Federation Chamber that members should be able to be heard in silence. This is the adjournment debate. And I call the member for Ford.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased to share with the Federation Chamber, Deputy Speaker, that innovation is alive and well across my electorate of Ford. Since its early days, from in 1884, when Australia's first rum distillery opened in Beenleigh, to the recent grand unveiling of the tech start-up Illumina in my electorate of Ford, is renowned for its pioneering ideas and innovation. And we now have another who has not only been recognised by myself previously, but recognised at the Oscars of Innovation. At the end of last year, Loganholme-based tech company Blocktex won the Manufacturing Innovation Award at the Innovation Oz Awards for Excellence. Their recycling solution of bringing fibre to fibre, the future to the fashion industry, saw them recognised for their achievements. Blocktex took out the award for its solution to transforming difficult-to-recycle textile waste into sustainable products. They were also named the Australian Hero at the Innovation Oz Awards, the top award of the night. Blocktex is aiming to address the huge problem of wastage in the fashion and textile industries, with 113 million tonnes of fibre produced, much of this very difficult to recycle. And with the growth of fast fashion and wastage, this number is expected to steadily increase in the coming years. Blocktex has developed a tech solution that is capable of significantly boosting the ability to recycle these types of polyester so it can be reused in other products. They collaborated with the Queensland University of Technology and the University of Queensland to conduct a pilot of this technology, and the company designed, built and commissioned the first ever commercial scale chemical recycling facility which has the ability to take in hard-to-recycle polyester and cotton blends and deconstruct them and separate the cotton from the polyester. This factory now has expanded to be able to take in 10,000 tonnes of textile waste a year. It gathers textile and fashion waste from large companies, government agencies, commercial laundries, charities, manufacturers and local councils. And earlier last year, more than 150 global companies and suppliers signed the 2025 Recycled Polyester Challenge, led by the Textile Exchange and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This challenge commits companies to increase their share of recycled polyester to 45% by 2025 and 90% by 2030. Without the innovation of companies like Blocktex, these targets would likely be unattainable. And I want to see manufacturers like Blocktex continue to thrive and survive and grow. For every Blocktex, there's a technical fabric Technical Fabric Services Australia, another quality, innovative business doing incredible work in and around my local community. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are doing it tough. More and more of our great innovators are doing it tough. And TFS General Manager has told me that they are facing extreme difficulties, and I quote, "The billions of government dollars are being allocated to chosen industries in renewable energy whilst leaving many sectors like manufacturing seriously behind. Manufacturing insolvencies have tripled since the last election and domestic energy prices are amongst the highest in the world, and we are seeing the flow-on consequences of that." Now, I'm pleased to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that a coalition government is working towards ensuring Australia can play its part in the world and play to its strengths. We are looking to build a nation which is a mining, manufacturing and agricultural powerhouse, a leader in technology and innovation. Now, we've seen the Prime Minister attempt to talk up his future Made in Australia manufacturing scheme. He's gone quiet on that for a little while now. But what he has repeatedly failed to acknowledge is that economist after economist has criticised the policy for its lack of breadth. Not even the Labor-aligned unions believe the government has the mettle and the know-how to run this scheme successfully. The policies the coalition will seek to implement in the next election are not just about the next election cycle, but they are the foundation of forging a better Australia. The reason being, Madam Deputy Speaker, is we need companies like Blocktex and TFS to grow and prosper, so we have a sovereign capability. So Australia will only get strong economic management with an LNP government at the helm.
And I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. People west of the Hawkesbury River have waited a really long time to see progress on a new flood-resilient bridge. 15 years after the Prime Minister and I stood on the now 121-year-old Richmond Bridge, people are finally seeing what the New South Wales government plan is. Now a 4-lane bridge providing a higher crossing and approaches, this latest design has listened to community feedback on previous concepts that originally ignored any flood resilience. Its aim is to ease congestion and make the trip across the river for thousands of people a bit easier every single day. Has Transport for New South Wales got a perfect plan? Well, I don't think anyone would expect it to be perfect. And while I have my own views, when I attended the online session last Wednesday and Saturday's in-person information session, I greatly appreciated the opportunity to hear people's feedback. From querying how effective the traffic flow will be to impacts on flooding and impacts on historic properties, there are a lot of issues that Transport for New South Wales will need to address. What is different, I note, to the last experience this region had of a new bridge at Windsor is that there is engagement by Transport for New South Wales. I'm sure all of us who fought for years to preserve the unique and now diminished Thomson Square, where there was absolutely no engagement about the serious issues of that flawed Windsor Bridge project, appreciate the difference. But it's very clear to me that the people in Southey Road in Hobartville have not had their concerns fully addressed, and they deserve to have their quality of life protected, and I'll be supporting them in that objective. I joined them in requesting an additional information session on the Richmond side of the river, which is in process of being arranged. And upgrading the North Richmond Terrace, Bells Line, Grossview roads intersection is also an essential part of this plan. I'm obviously very mindful that the larger bridge and new design does not come within the budget allocated by the previous federal and state Liberal governments. The shortfall for this project is the consequence of poor planning by the Liberals and the back-of-the-envelope costings. Scott Morrison announced $200 million for the bridge leading into the 2019 election, vastly underestimating the cost. He was forced to double the federal contribution in 2021, and now we know that still leaves a shortfall. This is the mess left by the Liberals that we are cleaning up. Projects of this scale are funded over a number of years, and I'll be working with my government and the New South Wales government to ensure there is no delay in completing the entire project. I started this process to build a bridge, and I won't stop until this project is fully delivered. Deputy Speaker, in 2012, something called Gonski was born. 2 years earlier, businessman David Gonski was engaged by the Labor government to lead a review into Australia's school funding with the aim of reducing the impact of social disadvantage on educational outcomes and ending inequities in the distribution of public money. The report was released in February 2012. The reforms recommended that governments reduce payments to overfunded schools that didn't need them and redirect those funds on a needs-based model. Its key recommendation was the Schooling Resource Standard, the SRS, a base rate of funding per student with extra loading for disadvantage factors. The SRS would determine the required funding needed for each school. The change was designed and still is to ensure that every Australian child, no matter what their background, can get a high-quality education. David Gonski said the system would ensure that differences in educational outcomes are not the result of differences in wealth, income, power or possessions. I say this because parents with kids at school now could well have been in school themselves as the Gonski momentum grew. I was handing out Gonski information back in 2013 at Winter Magic and Springwoods Fair. I held the first forum with the New South Wales Teachers Federation at about the same time at Windsor South Public School to help explain what Gonski meant. And I had to watch the Abbott government break its promise of no cuts to education as it ditched its commitment to Gonski funding on coming to government. Now, we don't call it Gonski, but better and fairer schools agreements are the same principle, and it's about time that New South Wales and the Commonwealth got the deal done.
I call the member for Durack.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today on what will most likely be the second last Thursday of this Parliament. I was first elected to represent the mighty electorate of Durack in 2013, and I can confidently say that this 47th Parliament is the least effective that I have witnessed. As this Parliament draws to a close, it is worth taking time to reflect on this term and whether this government has improved the lives of everyday Australians. As we get ready to go to the polls, the question that Australians will be asking themselves is this: am I better off now than I was 3 years ago? Sadly, for the vast majority of Australians, that answer will be no. Under Labor's economic mismanagement, Australians are experiencing the longest sustained period of inflation since the 1980s. Under those opposite, interest rates have increased 12 times. Energy bills have risen by $1,000. Living standards, well, they've collapsed. 27,000 businesses have gone insolvent, and we're also in a record-breaking household recession. In the last few weeks, we've seen Labor patting themselves on the back and rubbing their hands together for hopefully some good pre-election news, for the government is hoping for an interest rate cut when the RBA meets on the 18th of February. Now, let me tell you, Deputy Speaker, I want to see interest rates come down. People are hurting out there. Higher interest rates have been absolutely devastating and have meant that families with a typical mortgage have had to pay an additional $50,000 of interest since Labor came to government in May 2022. Unfortunately, there is no guarantee that we will get a pre-election cut, as core inflation, the RBA's preferred measure, still sits at 3.2% outside the RBA's target band. While Labor's failures to deal with the rising cost of living is, of course, front of mind for most Australians, people in my part of the world, in regional Western Australia, they are also deeply concerned by this government's attacks on farmers and failure to invest in the bush. The Prime Minister often credits Western Australia for his election in 2022. Why then did he insist on betraying West Australia and our regional communities by banning the live sheep trade? Now, this policy, well, it wasn't based on science nor on animal welfare concerns. Instead, it was all about currying flavour with inner-city voters on the East Coast. The Prime Minister said that live exports were in decline and this policy would boost domestic production. Well, how out of touch was the Prime Minister? Already we know that to be a furphy, because in the same week in January that the Tamman Sheep Abattoir closed, which is going to be back in Durack at the next election, the Moroccan government announced that they would begin to take our live sheep. Confidence has collapsed since this decision and the domestic market is suffering as a result. Farmers are rushing to get out of sheep and farming communities are hurting. Now, in terms of regional infrastructure, as I've pointed out to the House several times, this government is failing us. Those opposite, well, they ripped up the Building Better Regions Fund and replaced it with their Growing Regions program. Not 1 cent has been delivered from that program to fund projects in Durack. 2 projects, well, they were announced, but not a single cent has been delivered. Round 1 was a complete joke, marred by delays, and incredibly the minister, who happens to be sitting here in the chamber, underspent the pool by about $90 million. I mean, honestly, there weren't enough projects that could have actually been able to spend that $90 million. This meant projects like the Newman Youth Centre in the Pilbara, they weren't supported in round 1, but incredibly, just months out from an election, it's now all of a sudden deemed worthy of funding. Why wasn't it funded in round 1? The minister sitting here, I ask her. This was always a worthwhile project and Labor should not have delayed its approval because, as we know in the bush, this has inevitably led to cost blowouts. Now, failing to manage the economy and failing to support our regions are just typical features. The minister's got a lot to say at the moment about people listening here, but she has failed regional Western Australia, as have many of the ministers, whether it's housing, and the minister continues to talk over the top of me, such is the disrespect of this government, underspending on a fantastic program which should be supporting regional areas. This government has failed Western Australia, and Western Australians, they will remember that when we finally get to that election date.
And I call the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much. It has been the saddest of years for the family and friends of Samantha Murphy. An unfathomable loss of a wife, a mother and a friend. We continue to hold them close in our thoughts and to support them. Amid the shock and sadness we all feel, the community has stepped up in a way that shows the best of us in dealing with the worst possible news. And not just once. The community has also stepped up following the deaths of Rebecca Young and Hannah Maguire, which also happened during the last 12 difficult months. Grief can be a long path to walk, and having the support of people around you actually helps. As I've said before, we, the community, have another task as well, making the world that we live in a safer place for women. Simply living your life shouldn't put you in danger. Women shouldn't have to worry that being out by themselves at night or in the early morning or even being behind closed doors in their own home puts them at risk. I wrote an op-ed last April that how we educate our boys in this community matters. What opportunities they have to learn how to be the fabulous, beautiful men we all know in some aspects of our lives actually really matters. Governments have a role to play too, with campaigns, early intervention services, a national plan from all levels of government, as well as legislated paid family and domestic violence leave, better access to childcare and early education, and there are, of course, small signs of change. Ballarat resident Pauline O'Shannessy Dowling has told the ABC that when she is out running, which was what Samantha was doing, men who are also running are making the effort to let her know that they are not a threat. We saw at the Ballarat Marathon, the first one last year, a concerted effort of dads running with their daughters and really wanted to come together as a community to show how much they care about their girls. And there are signs of a much bigger change underway in our community. A partnership of organisations, business clubs and groups led by Women's Health Grampians and called Communities of Respect and Equality, CORE, Alliance shares a vision for safe, equal and respectful communities. Membership of CORE Alliance usually has between 1 and 5 new organisations join each year. Since February last year, when Samantha went missing, 19 organisations have joined. 13 of these from Ballarat, including a number of schools, and this significant increase is being driven by students themselves. There has also been a notable increase in inquiries from organisations and individuals, particularly men, interested in CORE and what they can do to prevent gender-based violence. Men's Initiative information sessions saw a massive increase in registrations, and in December, Women's Health Grampian and the City of Ballarat held a leadership forum for men interested in learning more about how they can lead change to prevent gender-based violence in the organisations they're part of. 188 people attended that event, 60% of whom were men. These are all the positive signs of change that we want. Again, the community is stepping up, and importantly, men are stepping up very much as part of that. We all need to see change across our communities, and in mine, that has been incredibly important and felt very deeply by the deaths of Samantha, of Rebecca and of Hannah. We want a community that is safe for everybody, but particularly women. We need everywhere, in every community, in every place, to stop seeing violence against women, to stop losing women like beautiful Samantha Murphy, who still had so much to give. And in this, the week anniversary of her loss, and as we're leading into the deaths of Rebecca and Hannah, my thoughts and my condolences continue to go out with their family. The legacy that we leave, or that we have from their deaths, is that we do so much better to keep women safe in our communities.
Hear, hear. The question is that the motion be agreed to. All the opinions say aye. All those against the motion is carried. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until Monday the 10th of February.